Part 1. From time immemorial people seem to have been calling him Margaya. No one knew, except his father and mother, who were only dimly recollected by a few cronies in his ancestral village, that he had been named after the enchanting god Krishna. Everyone called him Margaya and thought that he had been called so at his naming ceremony. He himself must have forgotten his original name. He had gradually got into the habit of signing his name, Margaya, even in legal documents. And what did it mean? It was purely derivative. Marga meant the way, and Aya was an honorific suffix. Taken together it denoted one who showed the way. He showed the way out to those in financial trouble. And in all those villages that lay within 100-mile radius of Malgudi, was there anyone who could honestly declare that he was not in financial difficulties? The emergence of Margaya was an unexpected and incalculable offshoot of a co-operator's zeal. This statement will be better understood if we watch him in his setting a little more closely. One of the proudest buildings in Malgudi was the Central Cooperative Land Mortgage Bank, which was built in the year 1914 and named after a famous registrar of cooperative societies, Sir, who had been knighted for his devotion to cooperation after he had, in fact, lost his voice explaining cooperative principles to peasants in the village at one end and to the officials in charge of the files at the secretariat end. It was said that he died while serving on a rural indebtedness subcommittee. After his death it was discovered that he had left all his savings for the construction of the bank. He now watched, from within a teak frame suspended on the central landing, all the comings and goings, and he was said to be responsible for occasional poltergeist phenomena, the rattling of paperweights, flying ledgers, and sounds like the brisk opening of folios, the banging of fists on a table, and so on, evidenced by successive night watchmen. This could be easily understood, for the ghost of the registrar had many reasons to feel sad and frustrated. All the principles of cooperation for which he had sacrificed his life were dissolving under his eyes. If he could look beyond the portals of the bank itself, right across the little stretch of lawn under the banyan tree, in whose shade Margaya sat and transacted his business. There was always a semicircle of peasants sitting round him, and by their attitude and expression one might easily guess that they were suppliants. Margaya, though very much their junior, he was just 42, commanded the respect of those who sat before him. He was to them a wizard who enabled them to draw unlimited loans from the cooperative bank. If the purpose of the cooperative movement was the promotion of thrift and the elimination of middlemen, those two were just the objects that were defeated here under the banyan tree. Margaya didn't believe in advocating thrift. His living depended upon helping people to take loans from the bank opposite and from each other. His tin box, a gray, discolored, knobby affair, which was small enough to be carried under his arm, contained practically his entire equipment: a bottle of ink, a pen and a blotter, a small register whose pages carried an assortment of names and figures, and above all the most important item, loan application forms of the cooperative bank. These last named were his greatest asset in life, and half his time was occupied in acquiring them. He had his own agency at work to provide him with these forms. When a customer came, the very first question Margaya asked was, "Have you secured the application form?" "No." "Then go into that building and bring one, try and get one or two spare forms as well." It was not always possible to secure more than one form, for the clerks there were very strict and perverse. They had no special reason to decline to give as many forms as were required except the impulse to refuse anything that is persistently asked for. All the same, Margaya managed to gather quite a lot of forms and kept them handy. They were taken out for use on special occasions. Sometimes a villager arrived who did not have a form and who could not succeed in acquiring one by asking for it in the bank. On such occasions Margaya charged a fee for the blank form itself, and then another for filling in the relevant details. The clerks of the bank had their own methods of worrying the villagers. A villager who wanted to know his account had to ask for it at the counter, and invariably the accounts clerk snapped back, "Where is your passbook?" A passbook was a thing the villager could never keep his hand on. If it was not out of sight, it was certain to be out of date. This placed the villager fully at the mercy of the clerk, who would say, "You will have to wait till I get through all the work I have now on hand. I'm not being paid to look after only your business here." And then the peasant would have to hang about for a day or two before getting an answer to his question, which would only be after placating the clerk with an offering in cash or kind. It was under such circumstances that Margaya's help proved invaluable. He kept more or less parallel accounts of at least 50 of the members of the bank. What its red tape obstructed, he cleared up by his own contrivance. He carried most of the figures in his head. He had only to cite a customer, for instance Milana of Capo, as it now happened to be, to say at once, "Oh, you have come back for a new loan, I suppose. If you pay 75 rupees more, you can again take 300 rupees within a week." The bylaw allows a new loan when 50% is paid up. How can I burden myself with a further loan of 300, Margaya? It's unthinkable. Now would begin all the persuasiveness that was Margaya's stock in trade. He asked point blank, "What difference is it going to make? Are you not already paying a monthly installment of 17 rupees 8 annas? Are you or are you not?" "Yes, I'm paying. God knows how much I have to. I don't want all that," Margaya said, cutting him short. "I am not concerned with all that, how you pay or what you do. You may perhaps pledge your life or your wife's saris. It is none of my concern. All that I want to know is whether you are paying an installment now or not." "Yes, master, I do pay." "You will continue to pay the same thing, that is all. Call me a dog if they ask you for even 1 anna more." "You fool, don't you see the difference? You pay 17 rupees 8 annas now for no thing, but under my present plan you will pay the same 17 rupees 8 annas but with another 300 rupees in your purse. Don't you see the difference?" "But what's the use of 300 rupees, master?" "Oh, I see, you don't see a use for it. All right, don't come to me again. I have no use for nincompoops like you. You are the sort of fellow who won't—" He elaborated a bawdy joke about him and his capacity, which made the atmosphere under the tree genial all round. The other villagers sitting around laughed, but Margaya assumed a stern look and pretended to pass on to the next question in hand. He sat poring over some papers, with his spectacles uneasily poised over his nose. Those spectacles were a recent acquisition, the first indication that he was on the wrong side of 40. He resisted them as long as he could. He hated the idea of growing old, but long sight does not wait for approval or welcome. You cannot hoodwink yourself or anyone else too long about it. The strain of holding a piece of paper at arm's length while reading stretches the nerves of the forearm and invites comments from others. Margaya's wife laughed aloud one day and asked, "Why don't you buy a pair of glasses like other young men of your age? Otherwise you will sprain your hand." He acted upon this advice and obtained a pair of glasses mounted in silver from the VN stores in the market. He and the proprietor of the shop had been playmates once, and Margaya took the glasses on trial, and forgot to go that way again. He was accosted about it on the road occasionally by the rotund optician, who was snubbed by Margaya, "Haven't you the elementary courtesy to know the time and place for such reminders?" Sorry, the other hastened to apologize. I didn't intend to hurt or insult you. What greater insult can a man face than this sort of thing? What will an onlooker think? I am busy from morning to night, no time even for a cup of coffee in the afternoon. All right, it doesn't matter. Will you send someone to my house? I'm not able to use those glasses either. I wanted to come and exchange them if possible, but it trailed off into indefiniteness, and the optician went away once again and soon ceased to bother about it. It was one of his many bad debts, and very soon he changed his commodity. Gradually his showcase began to display powder puffs, scents, chocolate bars, and the silver-rimmed glasses sat securely on Margaya's nose. He now took off his spectacles and folded the sides as if disposing once and for all of the problem of Milana. He looked away at a man on his right and remarked, "You may have to wait for a week more before I can take up your affair." "Brother, this is urgent. My daughter's marriage is coming off next month." "Your daughter's marriage? I have to find you the money for it, but the moment my service is done, you will forget me. You will not need your Margaya anymore?" The other made several deprecating noises, as a protestation of his loyalty. He was a villager called Kanda who had come walking from his village 15 miles away. He owned about 20 acres of land and a house and cattle, but all of it was tied up in mortgages, most through Margaya's advice and assistance. He was a gambler and drank heavily, and he always asked for money on the pretext of having to marry his daughters, of whom he had a good number. Margaya preferred not to know what happened to all the money, but helped him to borrow as much as he wanted. "The only course now left is for you to take a joint loan, but the difficulty will be to find someone as a partner." He looked round at the gathering before him and asked, "All of you are members of the cooperative society. Can't someone help a fellow creature?" Most of them shook their heads. One of them remarked, "How can you ask for our joint signature? It's risky to do it even for one's own brother." "It's most risky between brothers," added Margaya. "But I'm not suggesting it for brothers now. I am only suggesting it between human beings." They all laughed and understood that he was referring to an elder brother of his with whom he was known to be on throat-cutting terms. He prepared to deliver a speech. "Here is a great man, a big man. You cannot find a more important man round about Somanor. He has lands, cattle, yes, he's a big man in every way. No doubt, he has certain habits. No use shutting our eyes to it, but I guarantee he will get over them. He must have a joint loan because he needs at least 500 rupees immediately to see him through his daughter's marriage. You know how it is with the dowry system." Everybody made a sympathetic noise and shook their heads. Very bad, very bad. Why should we criticize what our ancestors have brought into existence?" Someone asked. "Why not?" Another protested. "Some people are ruined by the dowry." "Why do you say some people?" Margaya asked. "Why am I here? 3 daughters were born to my father. 5 cartloads of 5 paddy came to us every half year, from the fields. We just heaped them up on the floor of the hall. We had 5 halls to our house, but where has it all gone? To the 3 daughters. By the time my father found husbands for them, there was nothing left for us to eat at home." "But is it not said that a man who begets a son is blessed in 3 lives, because he gives away the greatest treasure on earth?" said someone. "And how much more blessed is he that gives away 3 daughters?" "He is blessed no doubt, but he also becomes a bankrupt," Margaya said. The talk thus went on, round and round, always touching practical politics again at some point or other. Margaya put his spectacles on, looked fixedly at Milana, and said, "Come and sit near me." The villager moved up. Margaya told the gathering, "We have to talk privately." And they all looked away and pretended not to hear, although all their attention was concentrated on the whispering that now started between the two. Margaya said, "It's going to be impossible for Kanda to get a joint loan, but he ought to be ready to accept whatever is available. I know you can help him and help yourself. You will lose nothing. In fact, you will gain a little interest. You will clear half your present loan by paying 75 rupees and apply for a fresh one. Since you don't want it, give it to Kanda. He will pay you 7.5%. You give the 4.5% to that father-in-law." Margaya always referred to the cooperative bank with a fresh sobriquet, "and take the 3% yourself. He will pay back the installments to you. I will collect and give them to you." Milana took time to grasp all the intricacies of this proposition, and then asked, "Suppose he doesn't?" Margaya looked horrified at this doubt. "What is there to be afraid of when I am here?" At this, one of the men who were supposed to be out of earshot remarked, "Ah, what is possible in this world without mutual trust?" Margaya added, "Listen to him. He knows the world." The result of all this talk was that Milana agreed to the proposal. Margaya grew busy filling up a loan application form with all the details of Milana's heritage, etc. He read it out aloud, seized hold of Milana's left thumb, pressed it on a small ink pad he carried in his box, and pressed it again on the application form and endorsed it. He took out of the box 75 rupees in cash and handed them to Milana with, "Why should I trust you with this without a scrap of paper? Now credit this to your account and have your loan, and then present that application. If they refuse to take it, why should they refuse? They have got to accept it. You are a shareholder, and they have got to accept your application. It's not their grandfather's money that they are giving you but your own." Bylaw. He quoted the bylaw, and encouraged by it, the other got up and moved on. It is impossible to describe more clearly than this Margaya's activity under the tree. He advanced a little loan, for interest, so that the little loan might wedge out another loan from the cooperative bank, which in its turn was passed on to someone in need for a higher interest. Margaya kept himself as the center of all the complex transaction, and made all the parties concerned pay him for his services, the bank opposite him being involved in it willy-nilly. It was as strenuous a job as any other in the town, and he felt that he deserved the difficult income he ground out of a couple of 100 rupees in his box, sitting there morning till evening. When the evening sun hit him on the nape of the neck, he pulled down the lid of his box and locked it up, and his gathering understood that the financial wizard was closing his office for the day. Margaya deposited the box under a bench in the front room of his house. His little son immediately came running out from the kitchen with a shout, "Appa!" and gripped his hand, asking, "What have you brought today?" Margaya hoisted him up on his shoulder. "Well, tomorrow, I will buy you a new engine, a small engine." The child was pleased to hear it. He asked, "How small will the engine be? Will it be so tiny?" He indicated with his thumb and first finger a minute size. "All right," said Margaya, and put him down. This was almost a daily ritual. The boy reveled in visions of miniature articles: a tiny engine, tiny cows, tiny table, tiny everything, of the maximum size of a mustard seed. Margaya put him down and briskly removed his upper cloth and shirt, picked up a towel that was hanging from a nail on the wall, and moved to the backyard. Beyond a small clump of banana trees, which waved their huge fan-like leaves in the darkness, there was a single well of crumbling masonry, with a pulley over its crossbar. Margaya paused for a moment to admire the starry sky. Down below at his feet the earth was damp and marshy. All the drain water of 2 houses flowed into the banana beds. It was a common backyard for his house and the one next door, which was his brother's. It was really a single house, but a partition wall divided it into two from the street to the backyard. Number 14D, Vinayak Street had been a famous landmark, for it was the carliest house to be built in that area. Margaya's father was considered a hero for settling there in a lonely place where there was supposed to be no security for life or property. Moreover, it was built on the fringe of a cremation ground, and often the glow of a burning pyre lit up its walls. After the death of the old man, the brothers fell out, their wives fell out, and their children fell out. They could not tolerate the idea of even breathing the same air or being enclosed by the same walls. They got involved in litigation and partitioned everything that their father had left. Everything that could be cut in two with an axe or scissors or a knife was divided between them, and the other things were catalogued, numbered, and then shared out. But one thing that could neither be numbered nor cut up was the backyard of the house with its single well. They could do nothing about it. It fell to Margaya's share, and he would willingly have seen his brother's family perish without water by closing it to them, but public opinion prevented the exercise of his right. People insisted that the well should remain common property, and so the dividing wall came up to it, and stopped there, the well acting as a blockade between the two brothers, but accessible from either side. Now Margaya looked about for the small brass pot. He could not see it anywhere. "Hey, little man," he called out, "where is the well pot?" He liked to call his son out constantly. When he came home, he could not bear to be kept away from him even for a moment. He felt uneasy and irritated when the child did not answer his call. He saw the youngster stooping over the lamp, trying to thrust a piece of paper into the chimney. He watched him from the doorway. He suppressed the inclination to call him away and warn him. The child thrust a piece of paper into the lamp, and when it burned brightly he recoiled at the sudden spurt of fire. But when it blackened and 8 burnt out, he drew near the lamp again, gingerly putting his finger near the metal plate on the top. Before Margaya could stop him, he had touched it. He let out a shriek. Margaya was beside him in a moment. His shriek brought in Margaya's wife, who had gone to a neighboring shop. She came rushing into the house with cries of, "What is it? What is it? What has happened?" Margaya felt embarrassed, like a man caught shirking a duty. He told his wife curtly, "Why do you shout so much, as if a great calamity had befallen this household, so that your sister-in-law in the neighborhood may think how active we are, I suppose. Sister-in-law, how proud you are of your relatives." Her further remarks could not be continued because of the howling set up by the child, whose burnt finger still remained unattended. At this the mother snatched him up from her husband's arms, and hugged him close to her, hurting him more, whereupon he shouted in a new key. Margaya tried to tear him out of his wife's arms, crying, "Quick, get that ointment. Where is it? You can keep nothing in its place." "You need not shout," the wife answered, running about and rummaging in the cupboard. She grumbled, "You can't look after him even for a second without letting him hurt himself. You need not get hysterical about it, gentle lady." I had gone for a moment to the well. "Everyone gets tap water in this town. We alone," she began, attacking on a new front. All right, he said, curbing her, and turning his attention to the finger. "You must never go near fire again, do you understand? Will you buy me a little elephant tomorrow?" the child asked, his cheeks still wet with tears. By now they had discovered a little wood-end crucible containing some black ointment in the cupboard, hidden behind a small basket containing loose cotton, which Margaya's wife twisted into wicks for the lamp in God's niche. She applied the ointment to the injured finger, and set the child roaring in a higher key. This time he said, "I want a big peppermint." At night, when the lights were put out and the sounds of Vinayaka Street had quietened, Margaya said to his wife, lying on the other side of their sleeping child, "Do you know, poor boy? I could have prevented Balu from hurting himself. I just stood there and watched. Now, I wanted to see what he would do alone by himself." His wife made a noise of deprecation. "It is as I suspected. You were at the bottom of the whole trouble." I don't know. That boy is terribly mischievous, and you are. She could not find the right word for it. Her instinct was full of foreboding, and she left the sentence unfinished. After a long pause she added, "It's impossible to manage him during the afternoons. He constantly runs out of the house into the street. I don't have a moment's peace or rest." "Don't get cantankerous about such a small child," said Margaya, who disliked all these adverse remarks about his son. It seemed to him such a pity that that small bundle of man curled beside him like a tiny pillow should be so talked about. His wife retorted, "Yes, I wish you could stay at home and look after him instead of coming in the evening and dandling him for a moment after he has exhausted all his tricks." "Yes, gladly, provided you agree to go out and arrange loans for all those village idiots." The child levied an exacting penalty on his parents the next day for the little patch of burn on his finger. He held his finger upright and would not let anyone come near him. He refused to be put into a new shirt, refused food, refused to walk, and insisted on being carried about by his mother or father. Margaya examined the hurt finger and said, "It looks all right, there seems to be nothing wrong there." "Don't say so," screamed the boy in his own childish slang. "I'm hurt. I want a peppermint." Margaya was engaged all the morning in nursing his finger and plying him with peppermints. His wife remarked, "He'll be ill with peppermints before you are done with him." "Why don't you look after him, then?" he asked. "I won't go to mother," screamed the boy. "I will be with you." Margaya had some odd jobs to do while at home in the mornings. He went to the nearby urban stores and bought sugar or butter. He cut up the firewood into smaller sizes if his wife complained about it, or he opened his tin box and refreshed his memory by poring over the pages of his red-bound account book. But today the boy would not let him do anything except fuss over him. The child kept Margaya at home for over an hour beyond his usual time. He could leave for the cooperative bank only at midday, stealing out when, oblivious of his surroundings, the little fellow's attention was engaged in splashing about a bucket of water in the backyard. When the water was exhausted, he looked all round and let out such an angry shout for his father that the people on the other side of the wall remarked to each other, "This is the worst of begetting sons late in life. They pet them and spoil them and make them little monsters." The lady on the other side of the wall could well say this because she was the mother of 10. Margaya looked up as a shadow fell on his notebook. He saw a uniformed servant standing before him. It was Arul Das, the head peon of the cooperative bank, an old Christian who had grown up with the institution. He had wrinkles round his eyes, and a white mustache and mild eyes. Margaya looked up at him and wondered what to do, whether to treat him as a hostile visitor or as a friend. Instinctively he recoiled from anyone coming out of that building, where he knew he was being viewed as a public enemy. He hesitated for a moment, then looked up silently at the figure before him. "Sit down, won't you, Arul Das?" Arul Das shot a glance over his shoulder at the office. "He will not like it if he sees me dallying here. I mean the secretary, asks you to come," said Arul. "Me?" Margaya could hardly believe his ears. "The secretary? What have I to do with your secretary? I don't know at all, but he said, go and tell Margaya to come here for a moment. Quote. On hearing this, Margaya became indignant. Go and tell them I am not their paid. He was about to say, servant, but he remembered in time, even in his mental stress, that the man standing before him was literally both paid and a servant, and thought it would be injudicious to say so now. So he left off the sentence abruptly and asked, do they pay me to appear before them when they want me? I don't know, said this very loyal cooperative man. He told me to tell you. The secretary is no ordinary person, you know, he added. He receives a salary of over 500 rupees a month. An amount which you and I will probably not see even after 100 years of service. Now Margaya's blood was stirred. Many angry memories welled up in him of all the indignities that he had suffered at the hands of his brother, who cut him off with half a house, while he himself passed for a man of means, a respectable citizen. Margaya felt that the world treated him with contempt because he had no money. People thought they could order him about. He said to Arul Das, Arul Das, I don't know about you. You can speak for yourself. But you need not speak for me. You may not see 100 rupees even after 100 years of service, but I think I shall do so very soon, and who knows, if your secretary seeks any improvement of his position, he can come to me. Arul Das took a few moments to understand, then swayed with laughter. Tears rolled down his cheeks. Well, I have been a servant in this department for 29 years, but I've never heard a crazier proposal. All right. He was convulsed with laughter as he turned to go. Margaya looked at his back helplessly. He cast his eyes down and surveyed himself. Perhaps he cut a ridiculous figure, with his dhoti going brown for lack of laundering and with his shirt collar frayed, and those awful silver spectacles. I hate these spectacles. I wish I could do without them. But age, who could help long sight? If I wore gold spectacles, perhaps they would take me seriously and not order me about. Who is this secretary to call me through the peon? I won't be ridiculed. I'm at least as good as they. He called out, Look here, Arul Das. With a beaming face, Arul Das turned round. Tell your secretary that if he is a secretary, I'm really the proprietor of a bank, and that he can come here and meet me if he has any business. Shall I repeat those very words? Arul Das asked, ready to burst out laughing again. Absolutely, Margaya said, and another thing, if you find yourself thrown out of there, you can come to me for a job. I like you, you seem to be a hard-working, loyal fellow. Further parleys were cut off because a couple of villagers came round for consultation, and started forming a semicircle in front of Margaya. Though Arul Das still lingered for a further joke, Margaya turned away abruptly, remarking, All right, you may go now. Please, said a peasant, be careful, sir. That Arul Das is a bad fellow. I'm also a bad fellow, snapped Margaya. It's not that. They say that the secretary just is what this fellow says. If we go in to get just one single form, he charges us 2 annas each time. Is that also a government rule? Asked the peasant. Go away, you fools, Margaya said. You are people who have no self-respect. As long as you are shareholders, you are masters of that bank. They are your paid servants. Ah, is that so? Asked the peasant. And the group looked up at each other with amazement. Another man, who had a long blanket wrapped round his shoulder, a big cloth turban crowning his head, and wore shorts and was barefoot, said, We may be masters as you say, but who is going to obey us? If we go in, we have to do as they say. Otherwise, they won't give us money. Whose money are they giving away? Asked Margaya. It is your own. Margaya, we don't want all that. Why should we talk of other people? True, true, said one or two others approvingly. Encouraged by this, the peasant said, we should not talk about others unnecessarily. He lowered his voice and said, if they hear it they may. Margaya's blood rushed to his head. You get away from here, he thundered. I don't want to have anything to do with people without self-respect, who don't know their importance and strength. What better words can we expect from someone like you who wraps himself in that coarse blanket at this time of the day? What better stuff can we expect from a head weighed down by so many folds of a dirty turban? The peasant was somewhat cowed by Margaya's manner. He mumbled, I didn't mean to offend you, sir. If I did, would I be here? That's all right, no further unnecessary talk. If you have any business, tell me. Otherwise get out of here. Before dusk I have to attend to so many people. You are not the only one who has business with me. I want a small loan, sir, began the peasant. I want to know how much more I have to pay to clear the balance loan. Why don't you go in there and ask your Arul Das? Oh, they are all very bad, unhelpful people, sir. That's why I never like to go there, but come to you first. Why do we come to you, sir, of all persons in this big city? It's because you know our joys and sorrows and our troubles, our difficulties and... All right, Margaya said, cutting him short, yet greatly mollified by his manner. I know what you are trying to say, don't I? He looked round at his clients, and they shook their heads approvingly, making appropriate sounds with their tongues, in order to please him. After all these bouts he settled down to business. He had a busy day, filling up forms, writing applications, writing even petitions unconnected with money business for one or two clients, talking, arguing, and calculating. He was nearly hoarse by the time the sun's rays touched him on the nape of his neck, and the shadows of the banyan tree fell on the drive leading to the cooperative bank. He started to close his office. He put back his writing pad, neatly folded up some pieces of paper on which he had noted figures, scrutinized again the little register, counted some cash, and checked some receipts. He arranged all these back in the small tin box, laid a few sheets of loan application forms flat on top of them so as to prevent their creasing, restored to its corner the ink bottle, and laid beside it the red wooden pen. Everything in its place. He hated, more than anything else, having to fumble for his papers or stationery, and a disordered box was as hateful to him as the thought of Arul Das. His mind was oppressed with thoughts of Arul Das. He felt insulted and sore. What right had he or anyone to insult or browbeat him? What had he done that they themselves did not do? He would teach this Arul Das a lesson no matter at what cost. At this moment he heard a step approaching, and looking up saw a man, wearing a brown suit, standing before him. His hands were in his pockets, and behind him at a respectable distance stood Arul Das. The man looked very smart, with a hat on his head. A very tidy young man who looked as if he had just come from Europe, Margaya reflected. Looking at him, he felt himself to be such a contrast with his brown dhoti, torn shirt, and the absurd little tuft under the black cap. No wonder they treat me as they do, he said to himself. Perhaps I should have exercised greater care in my speech. God knows what that Arul Das has reported. I should not have spoken. This fellow looks as if he could do anything. Margaya looked at Arul Das, and shuddered, noting the wicked gleam in his eye. He soon recovered his self-possession. I am not a baby to 14. Worry about these things. What can anybody do to me? He resolutely fixed his gaze on the hard knobs on his box, gave its contents a final pat, and was about to draw down the lid when the other man suddenly stooped, thrust his hand inside and picked out a handful of papers, demanding, "How did you come by these?" "These are our application forms." Margaya checked the indignation that was rising within him. "Put them back, will you? What right have you to put your hand into my box? You look like an educated man. Don't you know that ordinary simple law?" In his indignation he lost for a moment all fear. Arul Das came forward and said, "Take care how you speak. He is our secretary. He will hand you over to the police." "Stop your nonsense, you earthworm. Things have come to this, have they, when every earthworm pretends that it is a cobra and tries to sway its hood. I will nip off your head as well as your tail, if you start any of your tricks with me. Take care, get out of my way." Arul Das was cowed. He withdrew a little, but he was not to be dismissed so easily. He began, "He is our secretary." "That's all right, it's written all over him," yelled Margaya. "What else can he be? He can speak for himself, can't he? You keep away, you miserable 10-rupee earner. I want none of your impertinence here. If you want an old piece of cloth, torn or used, come to me." The secretary seemed to watch all this with detachment. Arul Das fretted inwardly, tried to be officious, but had to withdraw because the secretary himself ordered him away. "You go over there," he said, indicating a spot far off. Arul Das moved reluctantly away. Margaya felt triumphant, and turned his attention to the man before him. "Secretary, you will put back that paper or I will call the police now." "Yes, I want to call the police myself. You are in possession of something that belongs to our office." "No, it belongs to the shareholders." "Are you a shareholder?" "Yes, more than that." "Nonsense. Don't make false statements. You'll get into trouble. Reports have come to me of your activities. Here is my warning. If you are seen here again, you will find yourself in prison. Go." He nodded to Arul Das come nearer and held out to him the loan application forms. Arul Das avidly seized them and carried them. 15. Off like a trophy, the secretary abruptly turned round and walked back to the porch of the building, where his car was waiting. Presently Margaya bundled up his belongings and started homeward. With his box under his arm and his head bowed in thought he wandered down the market road. He paused for a moment at the entrance of the Regal hair-cutting saloon, in whose doorway a huge looking-glass was kept. He saw to his dismay that he was still wearing his spectacles. He pulled them off quickly, folded up their sides and put them into his pocket. He didn't feel flattered at the sight of his own reflection. "I look like a wayside barber with this little miserable box under my arm. People probably expect me to open the lid and take out soap and a brush. No wonder the secretary feels he can treat me as he likes. If I looked like him, would he have dared to snatch the papers from my box? I can't look like him. I am destined to look like a wayside barber, and that is my fate. I'm only fit for the company of those blanket-wrapped rustics." He was thoroughly vexed with himself and his lot. He moved to the side of the road, as cyclists rang their bells and dodged him. Jutta men shouted at him, and pedestrians collided against him. His mind was occupied with thoughts of his own miser-ableness. He felt himself shrinking. 2 students emerged laughing and talking from the Bombay Anand Bhavan, their lips red with betel leaves. They stared at Margaya. "They are laughing at me," he thought. "Perhaps they want to ask me to go with them to their rooms and give them a haircut." He kept glancing over his shoulder at them, and caught them turning and glancing at him too, with a grin on their faces. Somebody driving by in a car of the latest model seemed to look at him for a fleeting second, and Margaya fancied that he caught a glimpse of contempt in his eyes. Now at the western end of Market Road he saw the VN stores with its owner standing at the door. He may put his hand into my pocket and snatch the glasses or compel me to give him a shave. He sidestepped into Kabir Lane, and, feeling ashamed of the little box that he carried under his arm, wished he could fling it away, but his sense of possession would not let him. As he passed through the Naro Kabir Lane, with small houses abutting the road, people seemed to stare at him as if to say, "Barber, come early tomorrow morning. You must be ready here before I go for my bath." He hurried off. He reached Vinayak Street, raced up the steps of his house and flung the box unceremoniously under the bench. His wife was washing the child on the back veranda. At the sound of his arrival the little fellow let out a yell of joy, through the towel. "What's happened to make you come back so early?" asked Margaya's wife. "Early? Why, can't I come home when I please? I am nobody's slave." She had tried to tidy herself up in the evening after the day's work. He noticed how plebeian she looked, with her faded jacket, her patched, discolored sari and her anemic eyes. "How can anyone treat me respectfully when my wife is so indifferent looking?" His son came up and clung to his hand. "Father, what you have brought me today." He picked him up on his arm. "Can't you put him into a cleaner shirt?" he asked. "He has only 4, his wife answered. "And he has already soiled 3 today. I have been telling you to buy some clothes. Don't start all that now. I am in no mood for lectures." His wife bit her lips and made a wry face. The child let out a howl for no reason whatever. She felt annoyed and said, "He is always like this. He is all right till you come home. But the moment you step in, he won't even finish washing his face." "Where should I go if you don't want me to return home?" "Nobody said such a thing," she replied sullenly. The little boy shouted, put his hand into his father's coat pocket and pulled out his reading glasses, and insisted upon putting them over his own nose. His mother cried, "Give those glasses back or I'll." She raised her arm, at which he started yelling so much that they could not hear each other's remarks. Margaya carried him off to a shop and bought him sweets, leaving his wife behind, fretting with rage. In the quiet of midnight, Margaya spoke to his wife seriously. "Do you know why we get on each other's nerves and quarrel?" "Yes," she said at last. "Now let me sleep," and turned over. Margaya stretched out his hand and shook her by the shoulder. "Wake up, I have much to tell you. Can't you wait till the morning?" she asked. No, he spoke to her of the day's events. She sat up in bed. "Who is that secretary? What right has he to threaten you?" 17. "He has every right because he has more money, authority, dress, looks, above all, more money. It's money which gives people all this. Money alone is important in this world. Everything else will come to us naturally if we have money in our purse." She said, "You shouldn't have been so rude to Arul Das. You should not have said that you'd employ the secretary. That's not the way to speak to people earning 500 rupees a month. Let him get 5,000, what do I care? I can also earn 1,000 or 5,000, and then these fellows will have to look out." Much of his self-assurance was returning in the presence of his wife. All the despair and inferiority that he had been feeling was gradually leaving him. He felt more self-confident and aggressive. He felt he could hold out his hand and grab as much of the good things of life as he wanted. He felt himself being puffed up with hope and plans and self-assurance. He said, "Even you will learn to behave with me when I have money. Your rudeness now is understandable. For isn't there a famous saying, 'He that hath not is spurned even by his wife. Even the mother that bore him spurns him.' It was a very wise man who said it. Well, you will see." I'll not carry about that barber's box any more, and I'll not be seen in this torn dhoti. I will become respectable like anyone else. That secretary will have to call me Mr. and stand up when I enter. No more torn mats and dirty, greasy saris for you. Our boy will have a cycle, he will have a suit and go to a convent in a car. And those people, he indicated the next house, will have to wonder and burst their hearts with envy. He will have to come to me on his knees and wait for advice. I have finished with those villagers. He became like one possessed. He was agitated, as if he had made a startling discovery. He couldn't yet afford to keep away from the place where he worked. He went there as usual, but he had taken care to tidy himself up as much as possible. He wore a lace-edged dhoti which he normally kept folded in his box. It was of fine texture, but much yellowed now. He had always kept it in his box with a piece of camphor, and he now smelled like an incense holder as he emerged from his small room, clad in this gorgeous dhoti. It had been given to him, as it now seemed a century and a half ago, on the day of his wedding when he was sitting beside his wife on a flower-decked swing, surrounded by a lot of women folk joking and singing and teasing the newlyweds after the feast at night. He sighed at the thought of those days. How they had fussed about him and tried to satisfy his smallest request and keep him pleased in every way. How eminent he had felt then. People seemed to feel honored when he spoke to them. He had only to turn his head even slightly for some one or other to come rushing up and inquire what his wishes were. He had thought that that would continue forever. What a totally false view of life one acquired on one's wedding day. It reminded him of his brother. How he bargained with the bride's people over the dowry. He used to be so fond of him. His brother's face stood out prominently from among the wedding group in Margaya's memory, as he sat in the corner, beyond the sacrificial smoke, in their village home. Margaya sighed at the memory of it. They had got on quite nicely, but their wives couldn't. If women got on smoothly, half the trouble in this world is due to women who cannot tolerate each other. His wife was amused to see him so gaudily dressed. "What's the matter?" she asked. "Are you going to a wedding party?" "This is the only good one I have. They will never see me in that again," he said, indicating his discarded dhoti. "Keep it and give it to Arul Das. He may come for it." He was pleased with his own venom aimed at the distant Arul Das. This quiet pleasure pricked his veins and thrilled his body. He put on a new shirt which he had stitched 2 years ago but had not had the heart to wear, always reserving it for some future occasion. The child too seemed to be quite pleased to see his father in a new dress. He clapped his hands in joy and left him in peace, concentrating his attention on a piece of elephant made of lacquer-painted wood. Margaya had elaborately tied up his dhoti, with folds going up, in the dignified Pune style, instead of the southern fashion, looked down upon by people of other provinces. He explained to his wife, "You see, if we are treated with contempt by people, it is our fault. Our style of tying dhoti and our style of dressing it is all so silly." No wonder. He talked like a man who had just arrived from a far-off land. He spoke with such detachment and superiority. His wife was somewhat taken aback. She treated him with the utmost consideration when she served him his frugal 19 meal. Usually he would have to ask, "Food ready? Food ready?" several times and then pick up his plate and sit down and wait indefinitely as she kept blowing the fire. If he said, "Hurry up, please," she would retort, "With my breath gone, blowing on this wet firewood, have you the heart," etc. But today she said, "Your plate is there, food is ready." She served him quietly, with a sort of docile agreeableness. "I got this brinjal from the back garden," she said. "You didn't know I had a garden?" "No." "Nice stuff," he murmured agreeably. Even the little fellow ate his food quietly, only once letting out a shout when he thought his mother wouldn't serve him his ghee. On that occasion he threw a handful of rice in his mother's face. She just ignored it, instead of flying at him, and the episode ended there. At the end of the meal, Margaya picked up his plate as usual to wash and restore it to its corner in the kitchen. But she at once said, "Oh, don't, I will attend to it." He got up grandly and washed his hands, wiping them on a towel readily brought to his side by his wife. She gave him a few scented nuts and a betel leaf and saw him off at the door as he went down the street. He had opened his little box and picked up a few papers, which he carried in his hand. It looked better. He walked with the feeling that a new existence was opening before him. His clients were somewhat surprised to see him in his new dress. He didn't squat under the tree, but remained standing. "Why are you standing, Margaya?" "Because I am not sitting," Margaya replied. "Why not?" "Because I like to stand, that's all," he replied. He handed a filled-up application to someone and said, "Give it in there, and come away." He told another, "Well, you will get your money today. Give me back my advance." He carried on his business without sitting down. One of the men looked up and down and asked, "Going to a marriage party?" "Yes," replied Margaya. "Every day is a day of marriage for me. Do you think I like a change of wife each day?" He cracked his usual jokes. He placed his paper on the ledge of a wall and wrote. He had brought with him, hidden in his pocket, the little ink bottle wrapped in paper and his pen. As he bowed his head and wrote, he muttered, "I just want to help people to get over their money troubles. I do it as a sort of service, but let no one imagine I have no better business." "What else do you do, sir?" asked a very innocent man. "Well, I have to do the same service for myself too, you see. I have to do something to earn money." "You get interest on all the amounts you give us." Yes, but that's hardly enough to pay for my snuff," he said grandly, taking out a small box and inhaling a pinch. It sent a stinging sensation up his nostrils into his brain, and he felt his forehead throbbing with excitement. It made him feel so energetic that he felt like thumping a table and arguing. He said aggressively, "I want to do so much for you fellows, do you know why?" They shook their heads bewildered. "Not because of the petty interest you give me, that's nothing for me. It is because I want you all to get over your money worries and improve your lives. You must all adopt civilized ways. That's why I am trying to help you to get money from that bastard office." He pointed at the cooperative bank. They all turned and looked at it. Arul Das was seen approaching. "He is coming," they all said in one voice. Arul Das approached them somewhat diffidently. His gait was halting and slow. He stopped quite far away, and pretended to look for a carriage or something on the road. Margaya thrust himself forward and watched him aggressively. Arul Das stole a glance now and then at Margaya. Margaya felt annoyed. The sting of the snuff was still fresh. He cried out, "Arul Das, what are you looking for? If it is for me, come along, because I am here." Arul Das seemed happy to seize this opportunity to approach. Margaya said, "Mark my words, this is God-given shade under the tree. If you or your secretary is up to any mischief, I will make you feel sorry for your—" The Ville loggers were overawed by Margaya's manner of handling Arul Das. Arul Das had no doubt come spying, but now he felt uncomfortable at Margaya's sallies. If Margaya had been squatting under the tree with his box, he might have had a tale to bear, but now he saw nothing wrong. He had only one worry, that of being called an earthworm again before so many people. He tried to turn and go, saying, "I just came to see if the secretary's car had come." "Has your secretary a car?" Margaya asked patronizingly. Haven't you noticed that big red one? Margaya snapped his fingers and said, as if I had no better things to observe. Tell your secretary. He checked himself, not. 21. Being sure what his tongue might utter. Arul Das, if you are in need of an old dhoti or shirt, go and ask my wife. She will give it to you. Arul Das's face beamed with happiness. Oh, surely, surely, he said. He approached nearer to Margaya and whispered. Margaya raised his hand to his face and put his head back. The other's breath smelled of onion. Margaya asked, do you nibble raw onion in the morning? Arul Das ignored the question and whispered, you must not think that I myself tried to bother you yesterday. It's all that fellow's orders. He pointed towards his office. He is a vicious creature. You won't think that I. You can carry on here as you like, sir. Don't worry about anything. He turned and abruptly walked back. Margaya looked after him and commented to his circle. That's the worst blackguard under the sun, both of them are. This fellow carries tales to him and then he comes and behaves like a great governor here. What do I care? If a man thinks that he is governor, let him show off at home. Not here, for I don't care for governors. As he went through the town that day, he was obsessed with thoughts of money. His mind rang with the words he had said to the villagers, I'm only trying to help you to get out of your money worries. He began to believe it himself. He viewed himself as a savior of mankind. If I hadn't secured 300 rupees for it, he would be rotting in the street at this moment. So-and-so married off his daughter, educated his son, retained his house. His mind began to catalog all the good things money had done as far as he could remember. He shuddered to think how people could ever do without it. If money was absent, men came near being beasts. He saw at the market fountain a white sheet covering some objects stretched on the pavement. It was about 6 in the evening, and the street was lit up with a blaze of sunlight from the west. Pedestrians, donkeys and jutkas were transformed with the gold of the setting sun. Margaya stood dazzled by the sight. A ragged fellow low with matted hair thrust before him a mud tray and said, pointing at the sheet-covered object on the ground, an orphan's body, sir. Have pity, help us to bury him. Margaya threw a look at the covered body, shuddered and parted with the copper, as so many others had done. There was a good collection on the tray. Margaya, 22, averted his face and tried to pass quickly. Farther on, yet another man came up with a mud tray whining, orphan body. Get off, already given, said Margaya sternly, and passed on. There was money on this tray too. Margaya was filled with disgust. He knew what it meant. A group of people seized upon an unclaimed dead body, undertook to give it a burial and collected a lot of money for it. He knew that they celebrated it as a festive occasion. When they saw a destitute dying on the roadside, they cried to themselves, "Aha! A fine day ahead." They left their occupations, seized the body, carried it to a public place, put it down on the pavement, placed a few flowers on it, bought a few mud trays from the potter, and assailed the passers-by. They collected enough money at the end of the day to give a gorgeous funeral to the body. They even haggled with the grave digger and were left with so much money at the end of it all that they drank and made merry for 3 or 4 days and gave up temporarily their normal jobs, such as scavenging, load carrying, and stone quarrying. It made Margaya reflective. People did anything for money. Money was men's greatest need, like air or food. People went to horrifying lengths for its sake, like collecting rent on a dead body. Yet this didn't strike Margaya in his present mood as so horrible as something to be marveled at. It left him admiring the power and dynamism of money, its capacity to make people do strange deeds. He saw a toddy tapper going 100 feet up a coconut tree and he reflected, Morning to night he wears a loin cloth and goes up tree after tree for 50 years or more just for the 8 annas he get per tree. He saw offices and shops opened and people sweating and fatiguing themselves, all for money. Margaya concluded that they wanted money because they wanted fellows like the secretary of the cooperative bank to bow to them, or to have a fellow like Arul Das speak to them with courtesy, or so that they might wear unpatched dhotis and be treated seriously. Margaya sat down for a moment on a park bench. The municipal ITY had made a very tiny park at the angle where the market road branched off to Lali Extension. They had put up a cement bench and grown a clump of strong ferns, fencing them off with a railing. He passed through the stile and sat down on the bench. Cars were being driven towards Lali Extension. Huge cars. He watched them greedily. Must have a car as soon as possible, he said to himself. Nothing is impossible in this world. A cool breeze was blowing. The sun had set. Lights were lit up here and there. If I 23 have money, I need not dodge that spectacle dealer. I need not cringe before that stores man. I could give those medicines to my wife. The doctor would look at her with more interest, and she might look like other women. That son of mine, that Baloo, I could give him everything. His mind gloated over visions of his son. He would grow into an aristocrat. He would study, not in a corporation school, but in the convent, and hobnob with the sons of the district collector or the superintendent of police or Mongol Seth, the biggest mill owner in the town. He would promise him a car all for himself when he came to the college. He could go to America and obtain degrees, and then marry perhaps a judge's daughter. His own wife might demand all the dowry she wanted. He would not interfere, leaving it for the women to manage as they liked. He would buy another bungalow in Lali Road for his son, and then his vision went on to the next generation of aristocrats. At this moment he saw a man coming from Lali Extension, a cadaverous man, burnt by the sun, wrapped in a long piece of white cloth, his forehead painted with red marks and his head clean shaved, with a tuft of hair on top. A tall, gaunt man, he was the priest of the temple in their street. An idea struck Margaya at the sight of him. He was a wise man, well versed in ancient studies, and he might be able to give advice. Margaya clapped his hands till the gaunt man turned and advanced towards him. "Ah, Margaya, what are you doing here?" "Just came for a little fresh air. The air is so cool here, unlike our Vinayak Street." "Oh, these are all aristocratic parts, with gardens and fresh air. Our Vinayak Mudali Street, it's like an oven in summer. And what a lot of mosquitoes," Margaya added. "I couldn't sleep the whole night," the priest said. "Why should they make such a row in our cars? Let them suck the blood if they want, but it's their humming that is so unwelcome," said Margaya. They spoke of weather and mosquitoes and fresh air and the diseases prevalent in the town for about half an hour. The priest lived in a sort of timelessness and seemed to be in no hurry. The stars were shining in the sky. Margaya asked, "How was it you were coming this way?" "I had gone to perform a puja in a house in Lali Extension. You know that municipal chairman's house, they are very particular that I alone should perform these things. They won't tolerate anyone else. So every evening I do it there and then rush back to our temple, where the devotees will be waiting. A man can't be in two places at the same time." Truly said, "I will walk back with you to the temple, if you are going there. I have to go to another place on the way and then on to the temple. Just a minute's delay there, that's all. Do come with me, there's nothing so good as company on the road. I've to walk miles and miles from morning to night." They walked back towards the market road. The priest led him into some unnamed lanes behind the market. He stopped in front of a house and said, If you will wait here, I will be back in a moment." He went in. Margaya sat up on the pyal. There was a gutter below him. This is worse than our Vinayak Street. Margaya reflected. The place was occupied by a class of handloom weavers. All along the lane they had set up weaving frames with yarns dyed in blue and hung out to dry on frames. Somebody came out of the house and said to Margaya, "Won't you come in?" Margaya felt pleased at this attention and followed him in. There was a very small front hall in the house piled up with weaving frames, stacks of woven saris in different colors, and several rolls of bedding belonging to the members of the household. At one corner they had put up a small wooden pedestal on which a couple of figures of gods and one or two framed pictures were hanging. An incense stick was burning. His friend the priest sat up before the pedestal, with his eyes shut, muttering something. The master of the house with his wife and children stood devoutly at a distance. There were 4 children. One or the other of them was being constantly told, "Don't bite your nails before God." And they were so much overwhelmed by the general atmosphere that they constantly put their fingertips to their lips and withdrew them quickly as if they had touched a frying pan. Margaya was very much impressed with their seriousness, and wondered at the same time what his Balu would have done under these circumstances. He'd have insisted upon doing what he pleased and not only bitten his own nails but other people's as well. He would have upset all this holy water and camphor flame, Margaya reflected, with gratification. It seemed to him a most enchanting self-assertiveness on the part of his child. It gave him a touch of superiority to all these children, who wouldn't bite their nails when ordered not to. He felt a desire to go home and spoil his son. "I left so early in the day," he reflected. He suddenly asked himself, "Why am I knocking around with this priest instead of going home?" An old lady, probably the grandmother of the house, sat before the god with a small child on her lap. Only the child's eyes were visible, gleaming in the sacred lamps. It was entirely wrapped in a blanket. Margaya guessed that it must be very sick. They were all fussing over it. How old is that child? Margaya wondered, unable to get a full glimpse of it. Somehow this worried him. If Balu were in his position, would he have consented to be chained up like this? Some children are too dull. It was nearly 9 o'clock when they came out. Margaya followed the priest mutely through the streets. The town had almost gone to sleep. The streets were silent. "It's so late," he murmured. "What is late?" asked the priest. "We are so late." "Late for what?" Margaya fumbled for a reply. He said clumsily, "You said you'd be kept there only for a short time." "I thought you would be kept only a short time, that's why." In holy business, can we be glancing at a wristwatch all the time? That child has been crippled with a dreadful disease from childhood. It is now much better. It is some wasting disease. Do you perform pujas for his sake? Yes, every Friday. It is the puja that enabled young Markandeya to win over Yama, the god of death. Oh, Margaya exclaimed, interested but not willing to show his ignorance. Every child knows that story. Yes, of course, Margaya said non-committally. He felt he ought to say something more and added, "Those people," indicating over his shoulder a vast throng of wise ancestors, "those people knew what was good for us." "Not the people you mean, but those who were there even before them," corrected the priest in a debating spirit. "All right," Margaya agreed meekly. The priest asked him further on, "What do you gather from the story of Markandeya?" Margaya blinked and felt like a schoolboy. He said, "Seer 26. Moniously, how can I say? It's for a learned person like you to enlighten us on these matters." "All right," What was Markandeya? Asked the man persistently. Margaya began to feel desperate. He feared that the other might not rest till he had exposed his ignorance. He felt he ought to put a stop to it at once, and said, "It's a long time since I heard that story. My grandmother used to tell it. I should like to hear it again." "Ask then. If you don't know a thing, there is no shame in asking and learning about it," moralized the priest. He then narrated the story of Markandeya, the boy devotee of god Shiva, destined to die the moment he completed his 16th year. When the moment came, the emissaries of Yama, the god of death, arrived in order to bind and carry off his life, but he was performing the puja and the dark emissaries could not approach him at all. Markandeya remained 16 to all eternity and thus defeated death. That particular puja had that efficacy and it's that very puja I am forming on behalf of the child, who is much better for it. "Will the child live?" asked Margaya, his interest completely roused. "How can I say? It's our duty to perform a puja. The result cannot be our concern. It's karma." Yes, yes, agreed Margaya, somewhat baffled. They now reached the little temple at the end of Vinayak Mudali Street. There under a cracked dome was an inner shrine containing an image of Hanuman, the god of power, the son of wind. According to tradition, this god had pressed one foot on the very spot where the shrine now stood, sprang across space and ocean and landed in Lanka, Ceylon, there to destroy Ravana, a king with 10 heads and 20 hands, who was oppressing mankind and had abducted Rama's wife Sita. The priest was part and parcel of the temple. There was a small wooden shack within its narrow corridors, where he ate his food and slept. He looked after the shrine, polished and oiled the tall bronze lamps and worshipped here. Margaya hesitated at the entrance. It seemed already very late. "I'll go now," he said. "Why don't you come in and see the god, having come so far?" asked the priest. Margaya hesitated. He was afraid to ignore the priest's suggestion. He feared that might displease God. As he hesitated, the priest drove home the point. "You stopped me there." 27. At the park to say something. "You have been with me ever since and you have not spoken anything about it." Margaya felt caught. He found himself behaving more and more like a schoolboy. He remembered his old teacher, back there in his village, an old man with a white rim around his black pupils that gave him the look of a cat peering in the dark, whose hands shook when he gripped the cane, but who nevertheless put it to sound use, especially on Margaya's back, particularly when he behaved as he behaved now, blinking when he ought to be opening his lips and letting the words out. Later in life Margaya remedied it by not allowing any pause in his speech, but the disease recurred now and then. This was such a moment. He wanted to talk to the priest and seek his advice, but he felt reluctant to utter the first word. As he stood there at the portals of the temple, he feared for a second the old whacking from a cane. But the priest only said, "Come in. Isn't it late?" "For what?" Margaya once again blinked. He mutely followed the priest into the shrine. The main portion of the image went up into the shadows, partly illuminated by a flickering oil lamp. The priest briskly swept into a basket some broken coconut, plantains, and coins, left on the doorstep by devotees. He held up a plantain and a piece of coconut for Margaya. "Probably you are hungry. Eat these. I will give you a tumbler of milk." He went into his shack and came out bearing a tumbler of milk. Margaya squatted on the floor, leaning against the high rugged wall of the corridor. The town had fallen asleep. Vinayak Mudali Street was at the very end of the town, and no one moved about at this hour. Even the street dogs, which created such a furore every night, seemed to have fallen asleep. A couple of coconut trees waved against the stars in the sky. The only noise in the world now seemed to be the crunching of coconut between Margaya's jaws. It was like the sound of wooden wheels running over a sandy bed. Margaya felt abashed and tried to eat noiselessly. At this a bit of coconut went the wrong way, and he was seized with a fit of coughing, which racked his whole frame. He panted and gasped as he tried to explain it. The priest seemed to watch with amusement, and he felt indignant. What right has this man to keep me here at this hour and amuse himself at my expense? The priest said, "Drink that milk, it will make you all right." 28. He asks me to drink milk as if I were a baby. Next, I think, he will force it between my lips. He suddenly grew very assertive and said resolutely, "I don't like milk. I have never liked it." He pushed away the tumbler resolutely. The priest said, "Don't push away a tumbler of milk with the back of your hand." Margaya was no longer going to be treated and lectured like a schoolboy. He said, "I know. But who doesn't?" "And yet," said the priest with amused contempt, "you push away milk with the back of your hand as if it were a tumbler of ditch water." "No, said Margaya semi-apologetically. "I didn't push it with the back of my hand. I just tried to put away the tumbler so that you might take it." Ignoring this explanation and looking away, far away, the priest said, "Milk is one of the forms of goddess Lakshmi, the goddess of wealth. When you reject it or treat it indifferently, it means you reject her. She is a goddess who always stays on the tip of her toes all the time, ever ready to turn and run away. There are ways of wooing and keeping her. When she graces a house with her presence, the master of the house becomes distinguished, famous and wealthy." Margaya reverently touched the tumbler and very respectfully drank the milk, taking care not to spill even a drop. "That is better," said the old man. "There was once upon a time." He narrated from Mahabharata the story of Kubera, the wealthiest man in creation, who undertook a long arduous penance as atonement for spilling a drop of milk on the floor of his palace. When the story ended and a pause ensued, Margaya felt he could no longer keep back his request. He felt somewhat shy as he said, "I want to acquire wealth. Can you show me a way? I will do anything you suggest." "Anything?" asked the first emphatically. Margaya suddenly grew nervous and discreet. Of course, anything reasonable. Perhaps the man would tell him to walk upside down or some such thing. "You know what I mean," Margaya added pathetically. "No, I don't know what you mean," said the old man point blank. "Wealth does not come the way of people who adopt half-hearted measures. It comes only to those who pray for it single-mindedly with no other thought." Margaya began to tremble slightly at this statement. Perhaps he is a sorcerer, or a black magician, or an alchemist. He threw a frightened look at him and then at the shack in which he usually dwelt. "Perhaps he has hidden human bodies in that shack, and extracts from the corpses some black ointment, with which he acquires extraordinary powers." Margaya wanted to get up and run away. In the starlight the man looked eerie, his hollow voice reverberating through the silent night. Margaya's mind was seized with fears. "Perhaps he will ask me to cut off my son's head." He imagined Baloo being drugged and taken into the shack. "It's midnight or probably dawn. Let me go home." He got up abruptly. The old man did not stop him. He merely said, "Yes, go home. It is very late. Probably your wife will be anxious." Margaya felt tremendously relieved that after all he was permitted to leave. He got up, prostrated before the god's image, scrambled to his feet hurriedly, lest the other, sitting immobile where he had left him, should call him back. He hurried off through the silent street. Far off a night constable's whistle was heard. "I hope he will not take me for a thief." He was wearing his wedding dhoti, carrying his account papers under his arm. The whole thing struck him at this hour as being extremely ridiculous. He stood before his door, unable to make up his mind to knock. It might rouse his wife or his son. But unless his wife was roused, and how could he explain his late coming? "Something has happened to me, everything seems to be going wrong. That Arul Das has perhaps cast a spell. Can't be sure what everybody is up to." The world seemed to be a very risky place to live in, peopled by creatures with dark powers. As he stood there undecided, his wife threw back the bolt and let him in. She hadn't put out the kerosene lamp. She looked at him sourly and asked, "What have you been doing so late?" Once inside his home, all his old assertiveness returned. He was the master in his house, with nobody to question him. He ignored her and quickly went into the smaller room to undress and change. He washed himself briskly at the well. His son was sleeping near the doorway of the smaller room on a rush mat. He threw a loving look at him, with a feeling that but for a quick decision on his part the little fellow might be in that shack put to no end of tortures. His wife was very sleepy as she waited for him in the kitchen. He found that she had spread out 2 leaves. "What, you have not had your dinner yet?" he said, feeling pleased that she had waited for him. "How could I without knowing what had happened? Hereafter, if you are going to be late, I must ask your permission, I suppose," he said arrogantly. They consumed their midnight dinner in silence. They went to bed in silence. He lay on the mat beside his son. She went down into her room, and lay on a carpet on which she had already snatched a few hours of sleep before he arrived. Margaya lay in bed, unable to shut his eyes. He lay looking at the ceiling, which was dark with smoke. Cobwebs dangled from the tiles like tapestry. "She ought to clean it and not expect me to have to see such things," he said to himself angrily. He got up and blew out the kerosene lamp and lay down. He slept badly, constantly harassed by nightmares composed of the priest, the secretary, and Arul Das. One recurring dream was of his son stepping into the shack in the temple, with the priest standing behind the door, and all his efforts to keep him back proved futile. The young fellow was constantly tiptoeing away towards the shack. It bothered Margaya so much that he let out a cry, "Io! Io!" which woke up the child, who jumped out of bed with a piercing scream, which in turn roused his mother sleeping in the other room, and she sprang up howling, "Oh, what has happened? What has happened?" It was about half an hour before the dawn. All this commotion awakened Margaya himself. He cried, "Who is there? Who is there?" Someone was moving about. Someone made a noise. The uproar increased. "Where are the matches?" Margaya demanded suddenly and cursed in the dark. "Who asked you to blow out the light?" His wife said. He sprang up and ran towards the backyard, thinking that the intruder must have run in that direction. The little boy cried, "Oh, father, father, don't go. Don't go." His mother clutched him to her bosom. He struggled and wildly kicked for no reason whatever. The people of the next house woke up and muttered, "Something always goes wrong in that house. Even at midnight one has no peace if they are in the neighborhood." Margaya was sitting before his small box, examining the accounts written in his red book. His son came up to sit on his lap. Margaya said, "Go and play, don't disturb me now," and tried to keep him off. "This is my play, I won't go," said the child, pushing towards him again resolutely and climbing on his lap. Margaya had to peep over his head in order to look at the register before him. Balu's hair constantly tickled his nostrils and he felt irritated. He cried, "Baloo, won't you leave me alone? I will buy you a nice—" "What?" asked the child. "A nice little elephant." "All right, buy it now, come on." "No, no, not now. I'm working now," he said, pointing at the small register. Baloo shot out his little leg and kicked away the register petulantly, and in the process the ink well upset beside it and emptied on the page. Then the child stamped his heel on the ink and it splashed over Margaya's face and spoiled the entire book. Margaya felt maddened at the sight of it. He simply gripped the boy by his shoulder, lifted him as he would lift an unwanted cat, and almost flung him into a corner. Needless to say, it made the child cry so loudly that his mother came running out of the kitchen, her eyes streaming with tears owing to the smoke there. "What has happened? What has happened?" she cried, rushing towards the child, who, undaunted, was again making a dash for his father as he stooped over the wreckage trying to retrieve his damaged account book. "Look what he has done," he cried excitedly. "This monkey." "You are a monkey," cried the boy, hugging his father's knee as he was blotting the spilled ink. "If you don't leave me, I'll—" He was too angry. "I'll give you over to the temple priest. He'll flay your skin." "He will give me plantains," corrected the boy. He turned aside and suddenly pounced on the book, grabbed it and dashed off. His father ran after him with war cries. The boy dodged him here and there, going into this corner and darting into that. His tears had by now dried. He was enjoying the chase, and with hysterical laughter he was running hither and thither clutching the precious red notebook in his hand. It was a small space within which he ran, but somehow Margaya was unable to seize him. Margaya panted. With the effort, he cried, "If you don't stop, I'll flay you." "What is the matter with you? What has come over you?" asked the wife. "I'm all right," Margaya replied proudly. "You'll see what I'll do to that little monkey, that devil you have begotten." His wife gave some appropriate reply, and tried to help in the chase. She pretended to look away and suddenly darted across to seize the boy. He was too swift even for her calculations. She only collided against her husband, which irritated him more, and it allowed the child to dash into the street with his prize, with his father at his heels. He cried impatiently to his wife, "Get out of the way, you!" At which she turned and went back to the kitchen murmuring, "What do I care? I only let the rice overboil watching this tomfoolery." The boy dashed down the front steps, with his father following him. Margaya was blind to all his surroundings. All he could see was the little boy with his curly hair, and the small red-bound book which was in his hand. Some passers-by in Vinayak Mudali Street stopped to watch the scene. Margaya cried shamelessly, "Hold him! Hold him!" at which they tried to encircle the boy. It was evident that by now he had become completely intoxicated with the chase. Presently he found that he was being outnumbered and cornered. As a circle of hunters hemmed in, he did an entirely unexpected thing. He turned back as if coming into his father's arms, and as he was just about to grasp him, darted sideways to the edge of the gutter and flung the red book into it. The gutter ran in front of the houses. Roaring waters went down the drain God knew where. It was well known that any object that fell into it was lost forever. It sank and went out of sight, sank deeper and deeper into a black mass, and was hopelessly gone. The gutter was wide as a channel. Once in a while, especially before the elections, the municipal officials came down and walked along the edge peering into its dark current and saying something among themselves as to its being a problem and so on. But there they left it until the next election. It was a stock cynicism for people to say when they saw anyone inspecting the drains, "They are only looking for the election votes there." At other times the gutter continued its existence unhampered, providing the cloud of mosquitoes and the stench that characterized existence in Vinayak Mudali Street. Presently a big crowd stood on the edge of the drain looking at its inky, swirling waters. People sympathized with Margaya. Wild, inaccurate reports of what had fallen into it were circulated. Margaya heard people tell each other, a box was dropped into it. That child threw away a gold chain into it. Everyone looked at Balu with interest. He seemed to have become a hero for the moment. He felt abashed at this prominence and hung his head. The sun was shining on them fiercely, though it was just 9:30 in the morning. Margaya looked red with anger and exertion. His son's face was also flushed. The little boy crossed his arms behind him and stood on the edge of the gutter watching it with fascination. There was no trace of the book left anywhere. Margaya's blood boiled as he watched the unconcern of the boy, who, true to the type in that street, wore only a shirt which covered only the upper half of his body. Two peddlers carrying green vegetables, a cyclist who jumped off on seeing the crowd, a few school children, a curd seller, and a few others formed the group which now watched the gutter with varying comments passing between them. A man was saying, "Some people are so fond that they give their children everything they ask for." On hearing this, Margaya felt so enraged that he lifted the edge of the shirt the little boy was wearing and slapped him fiercely across his uncovered seat. The boy cried aloud, "Oh!" and turned round on his father. It started a fresh scene. Someone dragged away the child crying, "Save the child from this ruffian." Another said, he would have pushed the child into the gutter. A woman with a basket came forward to ask, "Are you a heartless demon? How can you beat such a small child?" She flung down her basket and picked up the child on her arm. Balu copiously sobbed on her shoulder. Another woman tried to take him from her, commenting, "Only those who bear the child for 10 months in the womb know how precious it is. Men are always like this." Someone objected to this statement. It turned out to be the man holding the cycle, who retorted with great warmth, "Boys must be chastised. Otherwise, do you want them to grow up into devils?" Margaya looked at him gratefully. Here at last was a friend in this absolutely hostile world. He swept his arms to address all the women in the gathering. "It's all very well for you to talk. But he has thrown in there an important account book. What am I to do without it? How can a baby know anything about account books and such things? God gives children to those who don't deserve them. You should not have kept it within his reach. You must always be prepared for such things where there are children." A washerwoman, who had come forward, said, "You were childless for 12 years, and prayed to all the gods and went to Tirupati. Was it only for this?" "What have I done?" Margaya asked pathetically. He was beginning to feel very foolish. Society was pressing in upon him from all sides, the latest in the shape of this woman who had on her back a bundle of unwashed linen. Vegetable sellers, oilmongers, passers-by, cartmen, students, everyone seemed to have a right to talk to him as they pleased. Society seemed to overwhelm him on all sides. The lone cyclist was hardly an adequate support on which to lean. Margaya turned and looked for him. He too was gone. He saw his son clinging fast to the waist of the cucumber seller, sobbing and gaining more sympathizers. Margaya knew that the little boy would not let his sympathizers go until they took him to the shop across the road and bought him peppermints. The crowd turned away and was now following Balu, and Margaya felt relieved that they were leaving him alone. He broke a twig off an avenue tree, and vaguely poked it into the gutter and ran the stick from end to end. He only succeeded in raising a stench. A schoolmaster who passed that way advised, "Call a scavenger and ask him to look for it. He'll have the proper thing with him for pocking here." Don't try to do everything yourself. Margaya obediently dropped the stick into the drain, reflecting, no one will let me do what I like. He turned to go back into his house. He climbed his steps with bowed head, because his brother's entire family was ranged along the wall on the other side. He quickly passed in. When he was gone they commented, something is always agitating that household and creating a row. Margaya went straight into the kitchen, where his wife was cooking, ignorant of all that had happened, and told her, the folk in the next house seem to have no better business than to hang about to see what is going on here. Do they ever find the time to cook, eat or sleep? This was a routine question needing no reply from his wife. She merely asked, where is the child? Probably rolling in the gutter, he answered wearily. What has come over you? She asked. You don't seem to be in your senses since last night. I'm not, and if you try to imply that I have been drinking or spending the night in a brothel, I leave you free to think so. The loss of the little book produced endless complications for Margaya. He could hardly transact any business without it. He had to conceal the loss from his customers, who he feared might take advantage of it. He had to keep out of the tree shade, remain standing or moving about, and give out figures from his head. It was all most irksome. It was an important day. He had to collect money from 3 or 4 men to whom he had advanced cash. Where is the book, master? Asked Callie, one of his old customers. Margaya said, I'm rebinding it. You know it must look tidy. But it is really not necessary for me. I have everything I want here, he added, tapping his forehead. Callie had not been here for some weeks now and so looked with suspicion at this man standing beyond the gate, without his box, without his book. Perhaps, thought Margaya, a Ruel Das has been speaking to him. Callie was like a tiger which suddenly meets the ringmaster, without the ring, or the whip in his hand. Why are you not in your place? He asked. Oh, I'm tired of sitting some sort of lumbago here, Margaya said. He sat down on the short compound wall. A country cart passed along, and it threw up dust. Margaya sneezed. You sec, you should not sit there, moralized the other. I should not, that's why I'm looking for an office hereabouts with chairs and tables. When eminent people like you arrive, you will be seated in chairs, he said. I must also look to your convenience, don't you see? Of course, said the other. But that banyan shade was quite good, sir. So much fresh air, I always like it. I don't, replied Margaya. It's all very well for a man like you, who comes out to lounge and have a nap in the afternoon. But for a businessman it is not good. The uproar those birds make. I can hardly hear my own voice. And then their droppings, and those ants down below. I used to suffer agony when I was sitting there. Where is your box, sir? Asked Callie, noticing its absence. Sent it for repainting. It's a lucky box, my dear fellow. I don't like to throw it away. It's not looking quite tidy. I've sent it for painting. I have it more as a keepsake. Yes. Whatever article has grown up with us must be kept all our life. In our village there was a fellow who had a hoe with a broken handle. I know all that, Margaya cut in, snubbing him just for the sake of effect. When he changed the handle, his harvest suffered, didn't it? How do you know, sir? Asked Callie, overawed. I know everything that goes on in people's minds, otherwise, I should not have taken to this banking business. Now I know. Third, what is going on in your mind? You have got in your purse, which you have tucked at the waist, money drawn from the bank. No, no, sir, he protested. Is it so easy to get money out of them? Listen. Your loan application was considered and passed on Monday last. You must have in your purse now 279 rupees and 4 annas. That is, you have given 8 annas to the clerk, and 4 annas as a tip to Arul Das. Is it, or is it not a fact? He cast a searching look at Kali, who had wrapped himself in a large sheet. There were 100 corners over his person where he might tuck a whole treasure. Kali met his gaze and turned to go. It was the dull hour of the afternoon when his other clients had gone into the bank or were dozing in the shade. They would all come a little later. Margaya was glad it was so, because he wanted to tackle this difficult man alone. Others would not be able to take a lesson from him. Kali was attempting to retreat. He looked up at the sky and said, "Looks like 3 o'clock. They have asked me to call in at 3 again. You know how it is, if we go in even a minute late. They make it an excuse." Margaya looked at him. If he let him go out of sight, he would pass into the bank and then out of it by the back door. He said firmly, "You give me the 50 rupees I advanced, with interest." The other looked puzzled. 50, with interest? What is it you are talking about, Mar? Gaya? At other times, if anyone said such a thing, Margaya would open the pages of his red-bound book and flourish it. He thought of his son. Why did the boy do such a thing? He had left the book alone all these days. Kali stopped, looked at him haughtily and said, "I never like to be called a liar. You may settle my account tomorrow, the first thing. Let me see what it is, and I will settle it the first thing tomorrow, to the last pie." He moved away. Margaya stood helplessly. He watched him with sorrow. He could not even throw after him any curse and threats, brilliant ones that occurred to him, as usual, a little too late. "Margaya, you have been made a fool of. They have made a frightful fool of you." "They haven't. I should have told him. You son of a gutter snipe. Don't I know what your father was? He went to jail for snatching a chain from a child's neck. You come of a family which would steal a matchstick rather than ask for it. I shouldn't have associated with you, but I'll get at you one day, don't worry. I can, but it was no use." Arguing with himself in this manner, the man was gone, while Margaya stood watching him dumbly. He recollected that he had helped him get loans 4 times when his life and honor, as he said, were at stake. "And this is what I get." He was filled with self-pity. He thought of the account book. Suppose he announced a reward to any scavenger who might salvage it? Even if it was salvaged, what was the use? How was it to be touched again and read? He had to wait at the gate, away from the line of vision of the secretary's room, sitting on the short parapet, and keep an eye on all his old customers who might go in and come out of the building. Without giving himself too much away, he was able to tackle a few of his old customers, and they didn't prove as tricky as Kali. He was able to salvage the bulk of his investments within the next 15 days, which amounted to just 200 rupees. Margaya stepped into the temple, driven there by a vague sense of desperation. He told himself several times over that he was going to see the god and not the priest. But he did not believe it himself, nor did the priest let him view only the god and go away. As soon as he entered the portals of the temple, the priest's voice came to him from an unknown, unobserved place, behind the image in the dark inner sanctum. "Oh, Margaya, welcome to this god's home." Margaya was startled as if a voice from heaven had suddenly assailed him. He trembled. The last worshipper had prostrated before the image and was leaving. Margaya prostrated on the ground before the inner sanctuary. A couple of feeble oil lamps were alight. A mixed smell of burning oil, flowers, and incense hung in the air. That was a combination of scent which always gave Margaya a feeling of elation. He shut his eyes. For a moment he felt that he was in a world free from all worrying problems. It was in many ways a noble world. where everything ran smoothly, no rural DOS or cooperative society secretary, no villagers with their complex finances, no son to snatch away an account book and drop it in a gutter. To detach him from all worries for a moment. He shut his eyes and let himself float in that luxurious sensation, with the tip of his nose pressed against the flagstones of the corridor. It was still warm with the heat of the day's sun. Its smell of dust was overpowering the dust carried. 38. By the feet of hundreds of devotees and worshippers are blown in by the wind from Vinayak, Mudali Street. When Margaya withdrew from the feeling of ecstasy and lifted his head, he saw the feet of the priest near his face. He looked up. The priest said, "Margaya's mind is deeply engrossed in God. If a man's piety is to be measured by the length of time he lies prostrate before God. Get up, Margaya. God has seen your heart already." Margaya got to his feet. He smiled at him and felt some explanation was due. He began awkwardly, you see, I felt I should visit God at least once a week." "Yes, you were here only last evening. Have you forgotten it already?" Not at all, Margaya replied. "I wonder what the time is. In this house there is no need for us to look at a watch. If it is dark, it is night. If it's sunny, it's day. That's all we know. This is not a bank, you see." At the word bank, Margaya gulped suddenly. He thought it referred to him. He said, "I don't have a watch either." "But you ought to," said the priest. "A bank keeps a watch to see how fast interest is accumulating." "My bank is finished. This is all I have," said Margaya, taking out of his pocket a small packet of currency notes, all that he was able to salvage from his banking operations. "Just 200 rupees. What is it worth?" 200 rupees, replied the priest. "Come in, I will give you some milk and fruit." "What again?" asked Margaya. "Yes, again and again," answered the priest. "Is there anything strange about it? Don't we have to eat every day, again and again?" Margaya was cowed. He explained, "It's not that. I was wondering what the time might be." "It's not yet tomorrow, that's all I know," replied the priest. "If it is really late for you, you can go." He turned and moved down the corridor and passed out of sight. Margaya stood still for a few moments. He looked at the image of the god and threw it a vague nod. His wife might once again start a lot of bother and pull a long face and think he'd been visiting a brothel. Funny creature, so jealous at this age, he reflected. I can tell her I've been out on important business. What makes her think I have sweethearts? Ever since he could remember, she had always shown a sort of uneasiness about Margaya. "Who'd consent to be a sweetheart to me?" he said. "A fellow with the name, Margaya, which seems almost a branding with hot iron." He remembered how a year or so ago she raised quite a lot of bother when he mentioned that a woman had come to him as a client under the tree. She looked sullen for 2 days until he convinced her that he had only been joking. He found himself obeying the priest without a single thought of his own. At a look from this gaunt man, he peeled 4 plantains and swallowed them in quick succession, and he drank a huge vessel of milk, treating the matter with as much reverence as he could muster. When the priest said approvingly, "That's very good indeed, that's an excellent performance," he felt proud of the certificate. The priest added, "You have been hungry without knowing it." "Yes, but when one's mind is full of worries, one does not notice," he said, feeling that the time had come for him to say something. The stars were out, a cool breeze was blowing, and night seemed quiet. The nourishment he had taken filled him with a sense of harmony, and so when the priest said, "Margaya, what is ailing you? You can speak out," he felt that he could no longer hesitate and fumble. that all barriers between himself and the world had been swept away and that he stood alone, that he alone mattered. He had a right to demand the goods of life and get them, like an eminent guest in a wedding house, a guest who belongs to the bridegroom's party, with the bride dancing attendants, ever waiting for the slightest nod or sign to run to his side and do some pleasing act. He swelled with his own importance. When he inhaled the fresh night air, it seemed to increase his stature so much that the earth and the sky were only just big enough to hold him. He began to talk in a grand manner. The priest, with his eyes glinting in the starlight, listened without speaking a word. He looked like a sloth cub in the darkness as he humped into a ball with his chin on his knees, his lank face thrust forward. Margaya catalogued all his demands. He was like a departmental officer indenting for his stationery a superior baize cover for his office table, a crystal paperweight, a shining mirror-like paper knife, and so on. There was no reason why he should be given the inferior things. Let the stores department beware. He would throw it out of the window if they sent in the miserable stuff they put on their fourth clerks' tables. He would just throw it out, that's all. He would be a man of consequence, let them be. 40. Where? Let the gods beware, they that provided a man with a home, and cars, servants, the admiration of his fellow men, and good clothes. After letting him run on as long as he liked, the priest opened his mouth and said, "That means you would propitiate Goddess Lakshmi, the goddess of wealth. When she throws a glance and it falls on someone, he becomes rich, he becomes prosperous, he is treated by the world as an eminent man, his words are treated as something of importance. All this you seem to want." "Yes," said Margaya, authoritatively. "Why not?" He took out of his pocket his little snuff box and tapped its lid. He flicked it open and took a deep pinch. The priest said, Go on, no harm in it. A devotee of Goddess Lakshmi need care for nothing, not even the fact that he is in a temple where a certain decorum is to be observed. It's only a question of self-assurance. He has so much authority in his face, looks, so much money in his purse, so many to do his bidding that he cares for nothing really in the world. It's only the protege of Goddess Saraswati who has to mind such things. But when Saraswati favors a man, the other goddess withdraws her favors. There is always a rivalry between the two, between the patronage of the spouse of Vishnu and the spouse of Brahma. Some persons have the good fortune to be claimed by both, some on the contrary have the misfortune to be abandoned by both. Evidently you are one of those for whom both are fighting at the moment. Margaya felt immensely powerful and important. He had never known that anybody cared for him, and now to think that two goddesses were fighting to confer their favors on him. He lifted his eyes, glanced at the brilliant stars in heaven as if there, between the luminous walls, he would get a glimpse of the crowned goddesses tearing at each other. "Why should they care for me?" he asked innocently. The priest replied, How can we question the fancies of gods? It's just there, that's all. It's beyond our powers to understand." Intoxicated by this, Margaya said, "A man with whom the goddess of wealth favors need not worry much. He can buy all the knowledge he requires. He can afford to buy all the gifts that Goddess Saraswati holds in her palm." The priest let out a quiet chuckle at Margaya's very reckless statement. Margaya asked, "Why do you laugh? Already a note of Saraswati is the deity presiding over knowledge and enlightenment." Authority was coming into his voice. The priest said, "Yes, this is what every man who attains wealth thinks. You are moving along the right line. Let me see your horoscope. Bring it tomorrow." Tomorrow? It seemed such a long way off. "Can't you say something today?" Margaya asked pathetically, feeling that he was being hurled back to the earth. The priest said, About the same time as today, meet me with your horoscope. Yet another night out and all the trouble with my wife, Margaya thought immediately. The priest saw him off at the door and shut the temple gate. The moment his wife opened the door, Margaya demanded, "Where is my horoscope?" "Horoscope?" his wife said dreamily. "What's happened that you want it so urgently at this hour?" She looked him up and down suspiciously and, feeling probably that it was not the right time to drag him into a talk, turned and went back to bed. It was 6 o'clock when Margaya got up. He would probably have slept on till 11, but for the fact that Baloo sat on his chest and hammered his head with his lacquered wooden elephant. When he opened his eyes, Baloo let out a shout of joy, put his arms round his neck, and pretended to lift him out of bed. Margaya looked at him benignly. This boy must grow up like a prince. The goddess will he'll certainly. He sprang up from bed. In a quarter of an hour he was ready, bathed, wearing a clean dress, and his forehead smeared with red vermilion and a splash of sacred ash. He seemed to be in such a great hurry that his wife, although she had resolved to ignore his recent eccentric ways, was constrained to ask, "What is agitating you so much?" "Is coffee ready?" he asked. She laughed cynically. "Coffee? The milk vendor created a scene here last evening demanding his dues. It was such a disgrace with the people in the next house watching. They seem to have nothing better to do," he said irrelevantly, his mind going off at a tangent. "Anybody will watch when there is something to watch," she said. "So, no coffee?" he asked with a touch of despair. It seemed terribly hard for him to start the day without a cup of coffee. It produced a sort of vacuum, a hollow sensation. He braved it out saying, "That's right. Why should we want coffee? As if our ancestors," she added, "there is no milk even for the child." Margaya threw a sad look at Baloo. Baloo seemed happy to be missing his milk. He said, "Let us drive away that milkman. It will be so nice." "Why, aren't you hungry?" Margaya asked. "Yes, I'm hungry. Give me biscuits." Margaya said, "Wait a little, young man. I'll fill a whole shelf with biscuits and chocolates and fruit." "All for me?" the boy asked eagerly. "Yes, absolutely, provided you don't bother me, but leave me alone now," Margaya said. He went into their little room and pulled out a wooden chest. It was filled with letters in their old envelopes of nearly 30 years ago. There you could find letters written by Margaya's father from a village. Margaya's father-in-law writing to his new son-in-law. A letter from an uncle saying that there was a nice girl to be married and proposing her for Margaya, enclosing horoscopes. There were several letters containing saffron-tipped horoscopes on old stiff paper. There were unknown names of girls Sither proposed to Margaya or to his brother, with their horoscopes, and many acrimonious letters that passed between him and his brother before the partition. Every letter he picked up stirred a cloud of dust. Little Baloo stole up and stood at his shoulder as he squatted on the ground. Margaya turned round and said, "Baloo, you must promise not to put your hand out." "Why?" Margaya handed him over to his wife with, "Take this fellow away. If you let him come near me again." She snatched him up as he protested and shouted and carried him away, muttering, "This is only a trick to send me off. You don't like me to see what you are doing, I suppose. I don't know what you are up to. So mysterious." "Women can't hold their tongues, that's why," Margaya replied. Little Baloo made a good deal of noise in the other room and Margaya muttered, "She has completely spoilt him, beyond remedy. I must take him out of her hands and put him to school. That's the only way. Otherwise he will be a terrible scoundrel." As he rummaged in the contents of the box, his mind kept ringing with his wife's weak protests and grumblings. "Seems to be bent upon worrying me. She's getting queer," he said to himself. He took up 43. Every envelope, gazed on its postmark, examined the letters, became engrossed for a while in bygone family politics, and finally came upon a couple of horoscopes tucked into an envelope addressed to his father. A short note by his father-in-law said, "I'm returning to you the originals of the horoscopes of Saubhagyavati, ever auspicious, Meenakshi, and your son Chiranjeevi, eternally living, Krishna. Your daughter-in-law is keeping well. Any day you ask us to fix the nuptial ceremony, I shall bring her over." Margaya, he hadn't yet attained that name, felt a sudden tenderness for his wife. She seemed to become all at once a young bashful virgin bride. "Meena," he cried, "here are the horoscopes." She came up, still bearing her son on her arm. Margaya flourished the horoscopes. "I've found them." He clung to them as if he had secured the plan of approach to a buried treasure. "What is it?" she asked. He held up the letter and cried, "This is a letter from your father about our nuptials." She blushed slightly, and turned away. "What has come over you that you are unearthing all this stuff?" Little Baloo would not let her finish her sentence. He started wriggling in her arm, and showed an inclination to dash for his father's horoscope. "Take him away," cried Margaya. "Otherwise we shall find all this in the gutter before our house. So much for this son of ours." Presently she came without their son to ask, "What exactly are you planning?" Her face was full of perplexity. "Don't worry," he said, looking up at her. He still felt the tenderness that he had felt for her as a virginal bride. He told her, "Don't worry. I've not been hunting out my horoscope in order to search for a bride." He laughed. She found it difficult to enjoy the joke with him. It was too puzzling. She merely said, "By all means, look for a bride. I shan't mind." He was disappointed that she sounded so indifferent. He was proud to feel that she guarded him jealously. However, he bantered her about it without telling anything. He could not exactly say in all seriousness what he was trying to do. "You will know all about it very soon." When he started out that day, she asked rather nervously, "Will you be late again today?" "Yes," he said. "What if I am late? I'm only out on business, be assured." His son said, "I will come with you too," and ran down the steps and clung to him. Margaya could not shake him off easily. He carried him up to the end of the street and lectured him all the way on how he should behave in order to qualify for biscuits and choco. 44. Lates. The lecture seemed to affect him since he became quite docile when Margaya put him back at his house and left. That night, in his shack, the priest scrutinized the horoscope with the aid of an oil lamp. He spread it out and pored over it for a long while in silence. He said, "Saturn, Saturn, this god is moving on to that house. He may do you good if you propitiate him. Why don't you go and pray in that other temple where they've installed the planetary deities? Go there with an offering of honey." "Where can I get honey?" Margaya asked, looking worried. He suddenly realized that he had never bought honey in his life. It was just one of those things that one always had at home, when the household was managed by one's parents. Now he recollected that ever since he became an independent family head he had managed to get along without honey. Now the testing time seemed to have come. The priest burst into one of his frightening chuckles. He remarked, Margaya shows the whole world how to increase their cash, but honey. He stands defeated before honey. Is that it? I will manage it, Margaya said haughtily. I was only saying. The priest arbitrarily cut short all further reference to the subject. On Saturday go to the temple and go round its corridor thrice. Do you know that Saturn is the most powerful entity in the world? And if he is gratified, he can make you a ruler of this world, or he can just drown you in an ocean of misery. Nobody can escape him. Better keep him in good humor. All right. I will do as you say, Margaya said, with quiet obedience in his voice. He felt as if Saturn were around him, and might give him a twist and lift him up for the plunge into the ocean of misery if he did not behave properly. It was 4 o'clock when the priest had finished giving him instructions, a course of prayers and activities. He recited a short verse and commanded Margaya to copy it down in Sanskrit, and side by side take down its meaning in Tamil. He saw him off at the door and said, "You need not see me again, unless you want to. Follow these rules. Will they produce results? Who can say?" The priest answered, "Results are not in our hands." "Then why should we do all this?" "Very well, don't. Nobody compels you to." Margaya felt completely crushed under all this metaphysical explanation. He bowed his head in humility. The priest closed one door, held his hand on the other, and said, "The Shastras lay down such and such rituals for such and such ends. Between a man who performs them and one who doesn't, the chances are greater for the former. That's all I can say. The results are, you may have results or you may not, or you may have results and wish that you had failed." "What is your experience with this mantra?" "Me," he chuckled once again, "I'm a sannyasi. I have no use for it." "Don't do it unless you wish to," said the priest and shut the door. Margaya stood hesitating in the road with the stanza in his pocket and all the spiritual prescription written down. He looked despairingly at the closed door of the temple and turned homeward. He felt it was no use hesitating. He might go on putting questions. The other could answer, yet still the problem would remain unsolved. "Problem? What's the problem?" he suddenly asked. It was a happy state of affairs not to remember what the problem was. The priest had been saying so much incomprehensible stuff that Margaya felt dizzy and fuddled. He stopped in the middle of the road and resolved, "He has told me what to do. I shall do it honestly. Let me not bother about other things." Margaya's wife was overawed by his activities. He told her next day, "Clear up that room for me," indicating the single room in their house in which she slept with her child, and into which all the household trunks and odds and ends were also thrown. "What are we to do with these things?" "Throw them out. I want that place for the next 40 days. Where am I to sleep? What silly questions you keep asking. Is this the time to think of such problems?" She became docile at this attack and begged, "Can't you tell me exactly what you want to do?" He told her in a sort of way. He'd been advised not to talk of his method and aim even to his wife. The priest had said, "Even to your wife there are certain practices which become neutralized the moment they are clothed in words." She asked, "Is this what people call alchemy, changing base metals?" "No, it is not," said Margaya, not liking the comparison. "They say that it is like magic, black magic," she wailed, looking very much frightened. "Don't get silly notions in your head. It is not that. The priest is not a man who dabbles in black magic. Don't go talking about it to anyone." The little room was cleared and all the odds and ends broken down, furniture, trunks and boxes, stacks of paper, spare bedrolls, and pillows and mats were pulled out and heaped in a corner of their little central hall. Baloo became ecstatic. He pulled down the things and mixed them up and generally enjoyed the confusion. Their neighbors heard the noise of shifting and thought, "They are doing something in the next house. Wonder what it is." They tried to spy on them, but there was a blank wall between them. Margaya had the room washed clean, chased out the rats and cockroaches, and swept off the cobwebs that hung on the wall and corners. It was a very small room, less than 8 feet broad, with a single narrow window opening on the street. If the shutter was closed, the room became pitch dark. Margaya drew up several pots of water from the well and splashed the water about. He then commanded his wife to decorate the floor with white flower designs, a decoration necessary for all auspicious occasions. He had a string of mango leaves tied across the doorway. He took from a nail in the hall the picture of the goddess Lakshmi, put up a short pedestal and placed the picture on it. The four-armed goddess, who presides over wealth, distinction, bravery, enterprise, and all the good things in life. When he carried the picture in, his wife understood something of his plans. "Oh, I see, I now understand." "That's all right, if you understand, so much the better, but keep it to yourself." He had 200 rupees in his possession still, which he had to use up. He gave his wife a list of articles she should supply him with, such as jaggery, turmeric, colored cooked rice, fruit, refined sugar, black gram cake, sweetened sesamum, curd, spiced rice, and various kinds of fruits and honey. He would require these in small quantities morning and evening for offering, and most of them were also to be his diet during the period of japa. He gave his wife 100 rupees and said, "This is my last coin. You have to manage with it." "What about the provisions for the house and the milkman?" "Oh, do something. Manage the milkman and the rest for some time, and then we will pull through. This is more urgent than anything else." A couple of days later, at the full moon, he began his rites. He sat before the image of Lakshmi. He shut the door, though his son banged on it from time to time. He kept only a slight opening of the window shutter, through which a small ray of light came in, but not the curiosity of the neighbors. He wore a loincloth soaked in water. A variety of small articles were spread out before him in little pans. He inscribed a certain Sanskrit syllable on a piece of deerskin and tied it round his neck with a string. He had been in an agony till he found the deerskin. The priest had told him, "You must carve out this on an antelope skin." Antelope, he gasped. Was he a hunter? Where did one go and find the antelope skin? You search in your house properly and you will find one. Our elders have always possessed them for sitting on and praying, said the priest. Very well, I will look for one, said Margaya. And then, have you seen any red lotus? Yes, I have, Margaya said apprehensively, wondering what was coming next. Where? Asked the priest. Margaya blinked and felt disgusted with himself. They usually sell them in the street for Vara Lakshmi festival. Exactly, said the priest. But now you will have to go where it is found. Formerly, you could pick up a lotus from any pond nearby. There were perhaps 10 spots in a town where you could pick up a lotus in former days, but now, our world is going to purchase because we have no more lotus about. It's a great flower. The influence it has on a human being is incalculable. After a dissertation on lotus, the priest said, beyond Sarayu, towards the north, there is a garden where there is a ruined temple with a pond. You will find red lotus there. Get one. Burn its petals to a pitch black, and mix it with ghee. Ghee, oh, yes, Margaya said. feeling that here was at least one article which you could find in the kitchen. Even if the store man was ill-disposed, one might still win him over in view of the impending change of circumstances. "It must be ghee made of milk drawn from a smoke-colored cow," said the priest. "Oh," groaned Margaya, not being able to hide his feelings. "Anymore, you probably think all this is bluff. Some fantastic nonsense that I'm inventing. Oh, no, I don't feel so for a moment, but only how hard. What a lot of. Yes, but that is the way it's done. It's so written in the Shastras. You have to do certain things for attaining certain ends. It is not necessary to question why. It'll be a mere waste of energy and you will get no answer. Well, follow my words carefully. Take the blackened lotus petal, mix it with ghee, and put a dot of it on your forehead after the prayer, every day, exactly between your eyebrows." "Yes," Margaya said weakly. He was feeling more and more in despair of how he was going to fulfill these various injunctions. Red lotus, gray-skinned cow, and antelope. Where am I? What a world this is. It seemed to him an impossible world. How am I to get all these? He groaned within himself. Have trust in yourself and go ahead. ... He will show you a way. Did you imagine that riches came to people when they sat back and hummed the tune? A whole day was spent by him in going after the red lotus. It took him through the northern part of the town, past Alaman Street in the banks of the Sarayu. He forded the river at Nalapa Mango Grove. A village cart was crossing the river. The man driving it recognized him and shouted, "Oh, Margaya!" He jumped out of the cart, sending up a great splash of water, which struck Margaya in the eyes and face. It also cooled his brow after the exertion of the day. The villager was an old client of his. He said, "What has come over you, sir, that we don't see you? Without you, we are finding it so difficult. You can't expect me to be at your beck and call all the time. I have other things to do. But you cannot just abandon us. I have other business to look after, my dear fellow. Don't imagine this is my only task. I used to do it more as a sort of help to my fellow men." They were both standing knee-deep in water. Margaya said, "Let me ride with you up to the branch road." The villager was only too eager to take him and asked his son, who was in the cart, to get down and walk so as to make room for Margaya. He asked, "So far out, may I know why you are going this way?" Margaya said, "You must never ask why or where when a person is starting out. That'll always have an adverse influence." He felt he was beginning to talk like the temple priest. "All right, sir," the villager said obediently. "We have to learn all these things from learned people. Otherwise how can we know?" The wheels crunched, roared, and bumped along. Margaya wondered if he was expected to reach his lotus by walking and not by riding in a cart. Would that in any way affect the issues, and would it violate the injunction laid by the priest? "I don't think there's anything wrong in it. He'd have mentioned it. Anyway, better not raise the question. Perhaps this cart was sent here by God." He got off at the crossroads and waited till the cart disappeared down the road. He turned to his left and cut across a field. The sun was already tilting westward. He looked up and said, "Heaven help me if it gets dark before I discover the lotus. I may not be able to know whether it is red or black or what, and then it'll be fine, having to start the whole business again tomorrow." He cut across the field and walked half a mile, and came upon a garden, hedged off with brambles and thorn. His legs ached with this unaccustomed tramping, and his feet smarted with the touch of thorns. He passed through the thicket expecting any minute a cobra to dart across and nip at him. This place must be full of them, supply the entire district with cobras from here. There was a small narrow gap in the hedge and he passed through it into a large wood, semi-dark with sky-topping trees, mango, margosa, and whatnot. The place looked wild and deserted and an evening breeze murmured grimly in the boughs above. Down below fallen leaves were ankle deep, and he passed through them with his feet sending out a resounding crick-crick. This is just where cobras live, under a blanket of dry leaves. Here flower gardens had gone wild, all kinds of creepers, jasmine bushes and nerium growing 10 feet high, were intertwined and mixed up. Some fool has let all this go to waste, he reflected. In fruit alone one might make 10,000 rupees out of this soil. He arrived at the pond. Its greenish water had a layer of moss. Occasional ripples were thrown out by warts or some other darting water creature, and mosquito larvae agitated the surface here and there. Margaya felt very lonely. The steps of the pond were broken and slippery. Half the bank on his side had fallen into the pond. On the other side there was a small mantap, its walls covered with cobweb and smoke. 3 blackened stones in a corner indicated that some wayfarers had sojourned and lighted a fire here. It might be last year or a century ago. In the middle of the pond there were lotus flowers red as the rising sun. They were half closing their petals. They know better than we do that it's nearing sunset, Margaya reflected. He stood on the somewhat slippery step thinking of how to reach the lotus. He'd have to wade through the greenish water. He stood ankle deep in it and wondered if he had better take off his clothes and go in. If this doti gets dirty, it will not merely be dirty but it'll acquire a permanent green dye, I suppose. And it'll be difficult to go back home wearing it. People might stare and laugh. Better take it off. There's no one about. He tucked up his dhoti and looked round in order to make sure. If a man lives here, he will not need a square inch of cloth, he reflected. Far in a corner of the little mantap on the other bank he saw someone stirring. He felt a slight shiver of fear passing through him as he peered closer. Is it a ghost or a maniac? He withdrew a couple of steps and shouted, "Hey, who are you?" Vaguely remembering that if it were a ghost it would run away on hearing such a challenge. But the answer came back. "I'm Dr. Pal, journalist, correspondent and author." Margaya espied a row of white teeth bared in a grin. "And what are you doing in this lonely place?" "Why not?" came back the voice. It was a hard, resonant voice, and there was no doubt that it was of this earth. "Why not what?" asked Margaya. "Why not here as well as anywhere else?" asked the man, rising and coming out. He was a man of 30 or thereabouts, his face still youthful, with a 3-day stubble on his chin. A lank, tall man, with sunken cheeks, and a crop of hair falling on his forehead and nape. He wore a pair of blue shorts and a banyan. As he came down the steps Margaya pointed at the lotus and said, "Get it for me." "You are wearing only shorts." The other nodded, waded through the water and came back with a lotus flower. He gave it to Margaya. Margaya felt overwhelmed with gratitude. "You are a very good fellow," he said patronizingly. "What are you doing here, all alone in this place?" "Working, of course," the other said. "Single-handed?" "Yes, it has to be a single-handed job." Margaya looked at the wilderness round them and said, "No wonder the place is as it is, too much for one man." The other laughed and said, "I have no thing to do with the garden. I'm here because I find it a very quiet place, and there seems to be no one to ask me to get out. Sit down. You will find it a really nice place though it looks such a forest." Margaya feebly protested, "I've got to go before it gets dark." "Why?" "I have a long way to go. There may be cobras, not one here." "Sit down," Sit down. Margaya sat down on the steps. The other sat beside him. A breeze stirred the leaves and sent a few riplets rolling and striking against the stone steps. Casuarina trees which loomed over the little mantap murmured. Brilliant sun from the west made the entire garden glitter. Margaya held the lotus delicately by the stalk and looked at it. Now and then people come here for lotus, said the other. Margaya wondered if he was going to ask him to pay for it. He didn't like the idea. Before he should entertain any such notion, just to divert his mind, Margaya asked, "What is your connection with this place?" "The same as yours," he replied promptly. "As I said, I am here because it doesn't seem to bother anyone. I discovered this by a pure fluke. I'm given to cross-country hikes. I have to in my profession." "What is your profession?" "I'm a journalist. I'm a correspondent for all these districts of a paper called Silver Weight published in Madras." "Tamil paper?" "Yes, of course. It is the most widely circulated paper in Tamil, with an enormous circulation in FMS, Ceylon, and South Africa. I cover these districts for them, and in my spare time write my own books." "Oh, you write books?" Margaya asked, full of wonder. Yes, during my spare time so difficult to find the leisure for it as a correspondent. All day I must knock about courts and offices and meetings on my cycle in search of news. I don't get much time. That's why I stay here, where I can work without disturbance." Margaya was greatly impressed. He had always thought very highly of newspaper people. "How many books have you written?" "4, came the reply, and he added, 3 are here, tapping his forehead. Only one has been got down on paper." "What is it? A story?" "A story. Oh, no, something more serious than that." "Oh," said Margaya, feeling that he had better not make inquiries in a region where he was a stranger. Books and writing were not for him. He was only a businessman. Margaya rose to go. "It's getting late," he murmured. "I will go with you up to the road," said the other, and followed him down to the edge of the pond. Margaya was fascinated by the sight of some more red lotus floating on water, with their petals already closing. He reflected, "Even if there is a pound of paste to be made, we have enough lotus here provided I can find the gray cow." His mind started worrying about the next stage of the search. Where are gray cows to be seen? Perhaps this author and journalist by his side might be able to help. They walked down the grassy path in silence for a while. Margaya surprised the other with the sudden inquiry, "Have you seen a smoke-colored cow?" "Where?" the other asked, stopping suddenly. "Anywhere. I mean, do you know where a smoke-colored cow can be seen?" "Why?" Margaya felt embarrassed. He blinked again. "I want its milk for some special, medicinal purpose." "Are you an Ayurvedic doctor or an aphrodisiac maker?" the other asked, looking at him. "Trying to make some potent drugs with red lotus and so on." "I have seen only Ayurvedic doctors coming here in a search of some herb or leaf or lotus and things like that." Margaya felt that because he had no ready answer, and no name to give for his avocation in life, the other would give him no useful tip. He covered the entire topic with a loud, prolonged laugh, at the end of which he found the other completing his remark. "I suppose the milk must always be white, whatever the color of the cow." Margaya agreed with this remark, laughed afresh, and changed the subject immediately. "What did you say your books were about?" "Sociology," said the other. "Oh, said Margaya, trying to look clever, though completely bewildered by the term. He felt like asking, "What is it?" but felt it might be an undignified inquiry. He just nodded his head and remained silent. The other asked, You know what sociology is, I suppose. He was trapping him unnecessarily. Of course, in a manner, but you know I'm a businessman. We businessmen have not much time for scholarly activities. Dr. Powell understood the position and said, it's a subject that has been much neglected in our country, particularly in our own vernaculars, in our mother tongue. They've everything in English, but in our mother tongue no. What should the thousands of PCR sons who know only our language do to learn the subject? Yes, it is very difficult, Margai agreed. They had now reached a thatched hut. Come in for a moment and see my home and study, said Dr. Powell. Margai protested and said something about its being dark. I will escort you back safely, said the other. Don't worry. There are no cobras here. He pushed the door open. A mat was spread on the ground with a greasy pillow on it, and away from it stood a small tin trunk with a bottle of ink and a stack of paper on it. A very small bedroom lamp was kept on the trunk. Dr. Powell pushed away the pillow and said, Pray sit down, I have not much furniture to offer, this is all. But this is a nice place. Margai sat down, carefully holding the lotus so as to protect it from being crushed. The place smelled of straw, which was spread on the floor. I do all my writing here. I return here at the end of my days roving in the town. I sit on this mat all night and write. At dusk I go out to that pond and sit contemplating in the mantap. It's a very inspiring place. Margai felt impressed and overawed, so he asked, as a piece of courtesy, I suppose that is your book. You send it afterwards for printing? Yes, I hope to, said the other. He picked up the manuscript and handed it to Margai. Margai received it with the utmost courtesy. The cover was of brown paper. He turned the last page and saw the number. Oh, 150 pages? He asked admiringly. 54. Yes, I want it to be a short book, so that any person may buy and read it. Margai turned the pages and a chapter heading caught his eye, Philosophy in the Practice of Kissing. Oh, kissing. You have written about kissing too. Yes, of course, it is an important subject. Who kisses? Children or? Oh, children's kisses are of no account here. Margai felt interested, and turned to the title of another chapter, Basic Principles of Embracing. He turned over the pages and started reading the first sentence of the opening chapter. Man embraces woman, and woman embraces man. He felt interested. Briskly turning over the leaves, he came upon the title sheet and read out aloud, Bed Life or the Science of Marital Happiness. What is this? Margai exclaimed. You said it was sociology. Yes, this is a branch of sociology. I have spent many years studying this subject. 1,000 years ago Vatsyayana wrote his Kama Sutra or Science of Love. I have based this whole work on it, plus research done by modern scientists like Havelock Ellis and so on. This subject must be understood by every man and woman. If people understood and practiced this science, there would be more happiness in the world. But it seems to be all about. Margai could not find the right word. He felt too shy. He felt eager to read on, but put it away, feeling that further inspection would seem indecorous. You can read it if you like, said the other. Margai put it away as if avoiding a temptation. You will have everything you want in a nutshell there. It seemed as if the other would not let him go. The author added, I want to have a few illustrations if I can find an artist. What those? Illustrating those? Gasped Margai. Yes, why not? I want to illustrate some of the parts. I want it to be of practical benefit. I want it to serve as a guidebook to married couples. My aim is to create happiness in the world. Are you married? Margai asked, coming to the point. Yes. Otherwise how could I write all that? But, you are alone, Margaya said, looking round. Yes, I have to be. He seemed saddened by some domestic memory. Margaya's curiosity could no longer be kept in check. Where is she? He asked bluntly. Said the other. I have had to leave her. Why? Why? Margaya said. How sad. He sat brooding. The other said, she was an impossible woman. A terrible woman who was unfaithful, and tried to ogle every man who appeared before her. A woman with a polyandrous tendency. Margaya was somewhat shocked at the free manner in which he spoke. The other laughed and said, how scared you look at my talk. Don't fear, I am not yet married. Probably you are already thinking, how can this fellow write about the happiness of married life when he himself has been such a failure? Was it not the line of your thought? How did you guess? Margaya asked. Everyone seemed to guess correctly what went on in his mind, a most dangerous state of affairs it seemed to him. I never married, the other assured him again. But I only gave you a sample of what is likely to happen. When people are ill-matched. True, said Margaya. Reading this book will be a way of preventing such tragedies, said Dr. Pal. The next few days Margaya was lost to the outside world. He sat in the small room repeating, O Goddess, who affordest shelter to all the fugitive worlds, thy feet, by themselves, are proficient in affording immunity from fear and bestowing boons. He had to repeat it 1,000 times each day, sitting before the image of the goddess. He wore a red silk dhoti and smeared his forehead and body with sacred ash. The cries of the peddlers in the street were submerged in the continuous hum that proceeded from his own throat. His son's continued shout of Appa, Appa, was heard by him as a distant muffled sound. A little light came through the small opening of the shutter. The room was filled with the scent of incense, camphor, sandal dust, and jasmine. All this mingled perfume uplifted the heart and thoughts of Margaya. He was filled with a feeling of holiness engendered by the feel of the red silk at his waist. He was gratified at the thought of his wife's obedience. She is quite accommodating, he reflected. She got up at 5 and prepared the jaggery sweetened rice which had to be offered to the goddess. Sat down with his eyes shut, he said to himself, I have achieved difficult things, gray cow's milk butter, red lotus made into black paste. This time last week I could not believe that I should be able to get together gray milk and red lotus. When the goddess wants to help a man, she sends him where all things are available. And who would have thought that there was a deserted garden? This brought to his mind Dr. Pal and his works. He felt an unholy thrill at the memory of Pal's book. It seemed as though his mind would not move from the subject. This man wanted to put in pictures. What a wicked fellow. It'd be most awkward. Why was Dr. Pal interested in the subject? Must be an awful rake. If he could write all that and was unmarried. Some of the chapter headings came to his mind. He realized with a shock what line his thoughts were pursuing, and he pulled them back to the verse. The priest had told him to let his mind rest fully on its meaning while repeating it. He kept saying, O Goddess, who affordest, etc., and unknown to him his thoughts slipped out and romped about, chiefly about the fruits of the penance he was undertaking. 40 days of this afterwards? He visualized his future. How was wealth going to flow in? When he became rich, suppose he bought from his brother the next house too, tempting him with a handsome cash offer. He realized that this was his major concern in life. He would be a victorious man if he could bring his brother to his knees and make him part with his portion of the house, and then he would knock down the partition wall. Each day it took him 8 hours of repetition to complete the 1,000, and then he reverently put the black paste on his forehead, lit the camphor, called in his wife and child and sprinkled the holy water on them. His jaws ached, his tongue had become dry. He felt faint with hunger, since he had to fast completely while praying. He followed this course for 40 days. When he emerged from the little room, he had a beard and mustache and hair on his nape. He had been told not to shave in the course of this penance. He looked venerable. His voice became weak. He could not utter any speech without automatically mixing it up with, "Oh, goddess, who affordest shelter." He looked like an examination student who has emerged from the ordeal, sapped in every way but with his face glowing with triumph. Margaya had lost 10 pounds in weight. Much of the padding on his waist and jowl had gone.